Senate Chamber. Programme sound.
We'll start the meeting in open session. Okay, welcome members. Can I first of all advise members of the need to maintain social distancing during the meeting? And can I say from the outset that I look forward to working with the committee members as I take the chair of this very important scrutiny committee. I want to just provide a brief overview of today's business. So the committee will consider subordinate legislation, briefing from RAISE, committee inquiry into decarbonisation of road transport in Northern Ireland, survey and stakeholder findings, departmental briefing, driver and vehicle agency, MOTs and driving tests, and a departmental briefing on DVA, lift action plan and public accounts committee report. Can I also advise members that due to some witnesses and members joining the meeting remotely, it would be helpful if members use the hand up icon to register that they wish to ask questions at each agenda item. Also, if members and witnesses could mute their mic when they are not speaking, that would allow everyone to hear the evidence and follow the meeting. Can I also advise members that the room must be vacated at 1 o'clock at the latest, and I request that members keep that in mind when asking questions. So we will go to agenda item 1 for apologies, and I have an apology from Andrew Muir and also an indication that Dolores will join in the meeting later this morning. So any other apologies? No? No. Okay. Agenda item number 2, Chairperson's business. To draw members' attentions to page 5, the clerk's memo regarding the informal meeting with the Transport Home Alternatives Group. Have members any questions they would like to ask in relation to that? Go to Keith Buchanan.
Chair, at that meeting, and I appreciate your word on it, we talked about possibly doing a visit on site just to get a flavour. Obviously, some of it's not from that area. We'd sort of briefly discussed that. It wasn't agreed. It was obviously going to be brought back here today for discussion. So that would be my proposal, just to go on site whenever it suits or a suitable time.
Okay. Any other members wish to? David?
Chair, yes, I think it was quite a useful meeting last week, though it was informal. Certainly support Mr. Buchanan and his request for even an informal type site meeting with the objectors. There did seem to be the ongoing situation of lack of communication. I know when we have met with the other side, the hub developers and whatnot, that they tell us they have communicated, but there does seem to be an issue over communication. Maybe can we just clarify with the developers just exactly what they have seen as being acceptable in communications during the project so far?
Okay. Any other members wish to contribute?
Chair.
Okay. Cathal, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I want to just wish you well in your new role, and we're happy enough to work with you. Chair, I would support that. Yeah, I mean, an on-site visit, we'll have a proper discussion. I thought the meeting, even though I joined it late, was a good enough meeting. So I'm happy enough to support an on-site visit.
So, if I'm right, we seem to have broad agreement, I'll put it to the floor, about a proposal to go for an informal site visit, but also maybe incorporated into that from David Hilditch in relation to perhaps maybe writing to the Minister regarding the concern about the lack of communication and ensuring that communication has been there.
We do need to hear both sides.
We need to hear both sides. Are members content with that proposal?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, thank you. Okay, agenda item number 3 is draft minutes at page 9. Draft minutes of the meeting on the 9th of June 2021. Are members content that the minutes are true and accurate reflection?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay. Agenda item number 4, matters arising at page 19. Matters arising from the meeting on the 9th of June 2021. Can I ask members if they have any issues arising from the meeting? I see at page 23 there's outstanding committee requests for information. Keith?
Yeah, just on that, Chair, I've brought it up before, just can't find the page, I'm looking here at the moment, would correspond, for example, to the Department of Health. It's what the committee has, what tools they got to try and get responses back, because some of those has come back to early December. So what tools has the committee got to get responses back if you're not getting them in, like, there's timely and then there's 6 months? Okay.
Maybe I'll take another member's question and then I'll defer to the clerk. So, Cathal, your hand's raised.
Chair, just 2 separate issues, if I may, Chair. Obviously, we were in the chamber yesterday in relation to the roads resurfacing issue, and I mean, I know that the Minister is going to carry out an independent examination. We haven't.
Sorry, Cathal, you're maybe muted.
Sorry, Chair, yes, it's with the independent examination that the Minister talked about into the roads resurfacing issue was raised in the Assembly Chamber.
Okay.
And I just, obviously you'd asked the question in relation to the independent examination. I think it's important that the committee are kept up to speed in relation to those terms of references, and I'd like maybe to contact the department and the Minister just to ensure that we're kept up to date. And also, Chair, the other one was in relation to, we had a presentation obviously from the bus and coach sector, especially the private sector. They're not happy, obviously, clearly with the way things have went. The Minister is releasing their future transport document, and it's all about decarbonisation, so they feel that they have a part to play in that. So I would like the committee to write to the Minister to ask how she's going to address the decarbonisation issues within the transport document, and how the private sector will play a role in that. So if we get those two issues raised, please, on behalf of the committee and ourselves. Thank you.
Okay, so there's three issues on the table. Firstly, in relation to Cahill's comments, the committee agreed to write to the Minister for the committee to be kept updated regarding terms of reference from yesterday. Yes? Yep. Agreed. Secondly, a point that has been raised by Cahill in relation to the decarbonisation report and ensuring that the committee or those that are interested parties and stakeholders have an ability to feed into that. Are we happy for that also to be put in writing to the Minister?
Agreed.
Agreed. And finally, I'm going to hand to the clerk perhaps to address Mr Buchanan's comments in relation to what tools do the committee have if, for example, we are waiting outlandishly for times for responses to committee requests, etc.
We can go to the standing orders for any correspondence that doesn't come through, but it is the nuclear option. Basically, we have written a number of times. Some of those issues now have passed. Last week's meeting, there was an agreement to review what information we need. So we've taken some of the older ones off, but we can, if members want, urge the other committees again to.
Well, when you meant the nuclear option, you're going to bring the Assembly down.
No.
Okay, so
we're going into the legal process then.
Okay.
If you.
Yeah. So we'll go to Roy first. Question.
The committees have the powers to demand persons and papers, and rather than having to go to the legalistic route, I think if we're not getting written answers on a timely basis, we can require that person to come here on a timely basis, and only if there were a failure of that could we go to the ultimate nuclear option, which is the legal process and enact the powers that the Assembly or this committee already has. I think most reasonable people, if they realise they're being brought before the committee to get an answer, they would provide a written answer.
Okay. Would it be the committee's mind perhaps to write once more to the Minister expressing our concern about the length of time outstanding requests have taken, and perhaps then after that then we can follow the route that are outlining to those people that haven't responded what we have outlining in relation to the length of time that is taken and what routes the committee can take. I see Martina's hand up there. Martina.
Chair, first of all, just to wish you well going forward in your position, and hopefully we can all get on well and work well together. That's our intention. Chair, this has been an ongoing issue, and I think what we would probably need to do as a committee is to start to track this better maybe than what we have done to date, through no fault maybe of our own, because of the busyness of everyone's lives and what's coming on the agenda. But I think we should have a tracking system so that when, for instance, after 3 or 4 weeks or whatever one thinks is a reasonable period of time that we don't get a response, that it's not just a note that and that's what tends to happen, that we are informed that we still don't have a response from the Minister or the Department in relation to a particular matter, so that then we can put in action what Roy has suggested before we would go to a legal route. But we are long past the time really for some of these. In fact, some of them had to be taken off our request list because the matter had either been resolved or had moved on. It had taken that long for the department to get back to us, or in fact had not got back to us at all. So I would like us to, as you're doing today, maybe at the beginning of the meeting, perhaps it's something that we have to do as members, to put more of a focus on this going forward and call the officials up, as Roy has suggested, after a period of time, and then if not, then go to the next stage.
Okay. No, that's fine. And from what I am aware, albeit in my short time here, I have been shown by the clerk a list of outstanding correspondence in relation to their timing and how long that has taken. If members are content, we can put more focus on that for the next week's meeting in relation to providing members with a list of outstanding correspondence and those that have failed to respond. And also included in that, if members are agreed, we could also write to the department to express dissatisfaction and that we will be looking into this matter further. Are members agreed?
I would agree with that, but I think it's also important that we do put a more formal process in to make sure we are more timely in our follow-up in future as well. So just an automatic process that we will follow to identify those who have not been responding on a timely basis, and then a staged process to get an appropriate answer.
Okay, I would agree with that action point. Are members agreed with those 2 points? Agreed? Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to agenda item 5, correspondence. Can I draw members' attention to correspondence memo at page 35 and tabled? Tabled at page 4, correspondence from North West taxi proprietors regarding issues facing the taxi industry, which he wishes to be addressed by DVA officials at today's meeting. The officials are here to provide an update on MOTs, driving tests, the lift action plan and the PSC report. Members will be aware that a briefing from taxi operators has been scheduled for Wednesday the 23rd of June on this matter, and committee can raise any issues with the department that arise from that briefing. Tabled at page 7, response from the Minister for Infrastructure to issues arising from the Committee for Infrastructure's meeting on the 26th of May 2021. Is the committee content to, with action points as suggested in the correspondence memo, agreed, unless anybody has anything to add to that, to the contrary? Is anybody an item they wish to discuss there in correspondence? Okay, agreed. Okay. Agenda item number 6 is subordinate legislation. The SL1s not subject to assembly procedure. At page 130, SL1, the weighting restrictions on urban clearways, John Street and Calvin Street OMA order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 132, SL1, the road races, Garran Point Hill Climb order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 134, SL1, the parking places on roads and weighting restrictions, Cookstown Amendment Order, Northern Ireland 2021. Are members content with the proposals for the statutory rules? Content. Agenda item number 7, SL1, the Water and Sewage Services Electronic Communications Order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 137, the proposal is subject to negative resolution procedure. This rule will amend the Water and Sewage Services Northern Ireland Order to permit Northern Ireland Water to enable certain notices and documents to be served electronically. The changes are intended to enable certain communications with NI Water to be conducted through electronic means as an alternative to post or hand delivery. Are members content with the proposals for the statutory rule? Content? Okay.
Sure.
Sorry?
Just a query on that. Does that mean that individuals is only going to get that electronically, or some?
Okay, that's a point.
I know that
Yeah.
rule's not saying that, but it's just a query. So in other words, is everybody going to get electronic? So any people that's not electronic in per broadband areas, what are they going to get?
Right to the
I've
department.
no issue with the rule, but it's just a query.
Okay, so you're happy we write to the department on that?
Just for, yeah, but I'm happy with that rule, but it's just for clarity
Okay.
on what other means of communication is still going to be there.
So members are content with the statutory rule, and in the meantime we'll also write to the department for further information in relation to that specific query. Great, yes? Okay. Agenda item number 8, subordinate legislation, SRs not subject to assembly procedure. Can I advise members that there are 7 statutory rules not subject to assembly proceedings at page 140. At page 140, SR 2021-145, the road races, Carncastle Hill Climb Order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 145, SR 2021-146, the Road Traffic Amendment 2016 Act, Commencement Number 3 Order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 148, SR 2021-149, the Parking Places Greencastle Street, Kilkeel Order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 151, SR 2021-150, the one-way traffic Belfast Amendment Order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 154, the SR 2021-157, the Parking and Waiting Restrictions Ballymena Order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 178, SR 2021-158, the Control of Traffic Londonderry Order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 181, SR 2021-159, the Parking Places Disabled Persons Vehicles Amendment Number 4 Order, Northern Ireland 2021. Can I advise members to note the statutory rules unless they have any issues to raise on the proposals? Are members content with the statutory rules? Content. Okay. Agenda item number 9, SR 2021-125, the Common Market Hill Road, Newton Hamilton Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 187, the committee considered the proposal for the rule on the 14th of April 2021 and was content on the statutory rule on the 19th of May 2021. The rule is subject to negative resolution. The attached document is in relation to a small correction in the rule. I believe it's a date change. Are members content?
Content.
Yep.
Content. Agenda item number 10, SR 2021-148, the Low Road Newry Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 190, the committee considered the proposal for the rule on the 19th of May 2021 and was content. The rule is subject to negative resolution. There has been no change to the policy content of the SR since the SL1 was considered by the committee. Are members content with this rule? Content. Yep. So I will read the following motion: that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2021-148, the Low Road Newry Abandonment Order, Northern Ireland 2021, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules, has no objection to the rule. Great. Great. Agenda item number 11, SR 2021-153, the Trunk Road T2 Ballynahinch Bypass Order, Northern Ireland 2021. At page 198 of papers, the committee considered the proposal for the rule on the 19th of May 2021 and was content. The rule is subject to negative resolution. There has been no change to the policy content of the SR since the SL1 was considered by the committee. Are members content with the rule? Yes. If so, I will read the following motion: that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered the SR 2021-153, the Trunk Road T2 Ballynahinch Bypass Order, Northern Ireland 2021, and has no objection to the rule. Right. Item number 12, we now go in for a committee inquiry, the committee inquiry into decarbonisation of road transport in Northern Ireland, and we have a briefing from RAISE regarding the survey findings. Hansard will record the meeting, and it's at page 212 of the research paper, and we'll just wait for officials to take their seat. Okay, so at this stage I'd like to welcome Dan Hull, Assembly Research and Information Service, for attending in person to the committee this morning, and also attending via Starleaf, Darrell Hughes, Assembly Research and Information Service. So Dan, I'll hand over to you for the briefing to the committee.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. Good morning. Darrell and I are here to present a summary of the electric and ultra-low emission vehicle survey results. Members will be aware that as part of the committee's inquiry into decarbonising Northern Ireland's road transport system, the Assembly Research and Information Service were asked to prepare a survey to ascertain public attitudes towards ultra-low emission vehicles. Members can find the research paper which contains these results on page 212 of your packs. Now, ideally, it would have been our transport specialist, Des McKibben, who would be here to provide this summary, as Des was responsible for designing the survey. However, Des is currently unwell, so we're very lucky to have Darrell Hughes, who is with us as a placement student at the moment from Newcastle University as part of a UK Research and Innovation PhD policy internship scheme. So Darrell has taken over where Des left off and will be reporting the results to you in just a moment. Just a couple of introductory points from me, though. The survey received 742 responses. It's important to note that these respondents self-selected and are therefore not representative of the entire Northern Ireland population. So the survey results should be interpreted and used with care. For example, 76% of respondents were male and just 24% were female of those who provided information on that question. 33% of respondents own or have previously owned an electric vehicle, which is far higher than the 0.4% of Northern Ireland's registered vehicles, which are ultra-low emission vehicles. Now, there are 5 sections to the survey. Number 1, we asked about awareness of and attitudes towards policy. Number 2, attitudes towards electric vehicles, or EVs, and ultra-low emission vehicles, or ULEVs. Number 3, we asked about experiences of EV owners and expectations of non-owners. We then asked about attitudes to transport demand management policies and methods. And lastly, we asked about travel behaviour, including COVID-19 changes. So I'm going to hand over to Daryl now, who's going to take you through those results in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. May I just check that you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so as you will be aware, UK government policy is currently set to ban sales of new petrol and diesel cars and vans by 2030. And this is to be followed by a ban on hybrid vehicles by 2035. Now, currently, around half of 1% of Northern Ireland's vehicles fleet are ultra-low emissions vehicles. Around half of these are battery electric vehicles, or EVs, and around half are plug-in hybrid vehicles, and I'll refer to these simply as hybrids for this presentation. So this morning, I'll present the key findings from the public survey into EVs and hybrids. I'll also raise a few key questions that the committee may wish to consider in its scrutiny of electric car policy. So as Dan has already said, the survey covered 5 broad areas, and I'll present each of these sections in turn. So section 1 was all about the awareness of and attitudes towards the government policy. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given that the respondents volunteered to take part in the survey, most of them had already heard of the policy. However, only around half of them were satisfied that they had sufficient information to understand this policy. Overall, 77% of respondents supported the policy and 18% opposed it. However, despite the fact that the policy received broad support, many respondents did actually feel that the policy itself was overambitious and even unachievable. Some felt that a more holistic transport policy was needed, for example, to include active travel options. And also, many were concerned that we need to make sure that poor people are not left behind by the transition. So section 2 was all about attitudes to EVs and hybrids. So we started off by asking respondents about the benefits and disadvantages of EVs as they see them. And the most widely perceived benefits of EVs were perhaps unsurprisingly related to the environment. So for example, 82% agreed that zero exhaust emissions were a key benefit. A further 60% agreed that EVs were environmentally friendly, and a similar number believed that EVs had low operating costs. On the other hand, the most widely perceived disadvantages of EVs were related to range and charging infrastructure. So for example, 92% of respondents agreed that the lack of charging stations was a key disadvantage. 60% agreed that range anxiety was an important factor, and around half felt that long recharge times were another issue. On a slightly separate topic, 3/4 of respondents were concerned about the high purchase price of EVs. And so we'll see these themes in the rest of the survey as well. We next asked respondents whether their next car will be an EV, and if so, when they intend to buy one. And then what we did was we split up the results here between the EV owners and the EV non-owners. So of the EV owners, 85% of these intended that their next car will be another EV. These people were generally quite affluent, environmentally conscious drivers who had facilities and space to charge an EV at home, which crucially means that they don't have to rely on the public charging infrastructure. Now, the other 15% of EV owners didn't intend their next car to be an EV, and this was overwhelmingly due to their poor experience of the public charging infrastructure in its current state. Now, of the EV non-owners, only around a quarter intended that their next car will be an EV. Interestingly, many of them would like to buy an EV in principle, but they expressed a lot of concerns about the lack of charging facilities and, again, the high purchase price. And 3/4 of the EV owners did intend to buy an EV, or they were undecided. And common concerns included the high price of new EVs and the poor reputation of the public charging infrastructure. It should be said that some respondents were also concerned about the environmental and social impacts of the transition to EVs. And so this raises a question. So it looks like privately owned EVs are currently most suitable for affluent people with space for home charging. So what are the affordable, sustainable travel options for other people? Moving on to section 3. This was all about the experiences of EV owners and the expectations of non-owners. So asking the EV owners to report on their experiences of EV ownership and use, we found that over 90% were dissatisfied with the availability and maintenance of public charging stations. Now, respondents were very generous in giving detailed feedback and suggestions regarding ways to improve this, particularly things like the location, the capacity, the governance and the design of charging infrastructure. I don't have time to go into that, but I'll refer members to pages 236 to 238 of the members pack, and there's some more details in there. We also asked EV non-owners to respond or to report on their expectations of owning and using an EV. And it's important to say that EV ranges and charge rates have improved a lot in recent years as technology's got better. And the average new EV has something like a 200-mile range. However, most EV non-owner respondents would expect to be able to travel over 200 miles per charge, in some cases over 300 miles per charge, as well as to be able to charge rapidly, so i.e. under half an hour. Now, currently, these kinds of ranges and charge times are available, but they tend to be in the more expensive vehicles on the market. So again, it raises an affordability question. And so drawing section 3 to a close, I think the main thing to consider comes out of this is whether a strategy is needed to improve the location, number and capacity of charging stations. Section 4 was all about the attitudes to transport demand management policies. So what we did was we sought views on 9 different policies which are designed to manage demand for travel in favour of sustainable modes. And it's worth distinguishing between the pull policies, which are designed to encourage sustainable travel, and the push policies, which are designed to discourage fossil fuel-based travel. And what we found was that the pull policies were really popular among respondents. So around 90% supported investments in the public charging infrastructure, which again chimes well with the rest of the survey. And 90% supported subsidies for EVs. So things like VAT cuts or grants for the purchase of new and second-hand vehicles. Public sector investment was also a popular policy. So 83% supported a requirement that new vehicles purchased by the government, local councils, etc., are EVs or hybrid vehicles. This brings us on to the push policies, and these were generally less popular. So to give just 2 examples, 60% supported introducing low emission zones in town centres, while 36% opposed these. And the least popular policy option was a mandatory workplace parking levy. So that's where fossil fuel car drivers have to pay to park. And this was supported by only 36% of respondents and opposed by 57%. So the question this raises is, well, what is the appropriate balance of push and pull policies to encourage sustainable transport? And the fifth and final section was all about travel behaviour. So we asked respondents about the way that they currently travel and their willingness to change travel modes in the future. And we also covered something of the impacts of COVID-19 on their travel. So I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that cars currently dominate travel in Northern Ireland. This is especially true for longer journeys. However, we found that journeys under 2 miles were quite often undertaken by active travel options, such as walking and cycling. Around half of respondents would consider changing their mode of travel for these short journeys under 2 miles. However, less than a third would consider changing them for journeys of over 5 miles. And this is really important because 2/3 of respondents travelled over 5 miles to a place of work or education. So in terms of COVID-19, we all know that COVID-19 has reduced overall travel demand, and it's also caused a general shift away from cars and public transport to active travel. And some respondents actually indicated that they have switched from public transport to car journeys in some instances. And after the anticipated removal of the COVID-19 restrictions, just over half of respondents expected to work from home at least some of the time. So this raises another question, which is what policies could encourage the continuation of the positive changes we've seen in travel behaviour due to COVID-19? So those are the survey results, and I'll just conclude that. I'll say that the survey provides useful insights into the views of Eevee owners and non-owners. However, we have to be careful to not extrapolate these to the whole population. So among respondents, there was a widespread support for the government policy to ban sales of fossil fuel vehicles. However, there were a lot of concerns and scepticism about how this would be achieved in practice. Many of the drivers would like to switch to an EV in principle. However, the key barriers to switching are things like charging infrastructure and range, and the purchase price as well. The people who currently own EVs were highly dissatisfied with the public charging infrastructure, and the poor reputation of the charging infrastructure has kind of spilled out into general knowledge, so that the EV owners are also concerned about this if they were to switch. In terms of policies, poor policies received high support, while push policies tended to attract more opposition. And finally, there was some willingness to switch away from cars for short journeys. However, respondents were far less likely to consider switching for longer journeys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Darryl and I will be happy to take any questions from the committee regarding the survey results. However, we would just say that neither of us are transport specialists, so we may have to defer to our colleague Des McKibben for any more detailed answers, but we'll do our very best. Okay. Can I thank you both for your presentation this morning, and can I, on behalf of the committee, extend our best wishes to Des as he recovers. In relation to the inquiry, I know that you cannot get into the policy-specific aspects, given that you aren't the experts in that field, but I was wondering if you could say something about how representative the survey actually is, given that there's a high number of EV car owners compared to the population, and whether you would say the survey is useful or not. Yeah, I think, well, perhaps if I start off, Darryl, and then perhaps you could follow up if you've got anything more to add. The survey was useful in the sense that 742 responses gave us a really good wide range of information, particularly in terms of the qualitative information, the comments, which we've drawn together in terms of a series of different themes in the paper. That gave us a really good impression, a really wide-ranging set of information. However, 742 responses is less than 0.04% of the population. And as we'd said at the beginning, 33% of them were EV owners, compared to 0.4% of the population of Northern Ireland's registered vehicles. So I think we do have to be careful about inferring too much on a sort of population-wide basis. Okay. Same from Darren, is it? Do you want to comment?
Yeah, I would just add to that and say that with the caveats that Dan has just mentioned there about the survey not being representative, the survey is useful. So I'm thinking particularly about the experiences of the Eevee owners. Okay, they might not be representative of the population, but they do have really valuable feedback that I think could be learned from.
Okay. And secondly, in analysing the data, was there anything that came to mind you could think of which would be act as quick wins for developing this area of policy towards the 2030 deadline for ending the sale of petrol cars?
It's obviously difficult for us to make any policy recommendations. That wouldn't really be our role. I suppose the most stark conclusions that we would draw the committee's attention to are the wide levels, the very large levels of dissatisfaction with public charging infrastructure among EV car owners who are the ones who rely on it. I think it was 90%, wasn't it, Daryl, expressed dissatisfaction with the charging infrastructure?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, a very strong dissatisfaction. That came out in the comments as well. I think we can't really, as the Information Service, talk about sort of policy recommendations, but I would probably refer members to the those pages in your pack. So which pages were they? Let me just check this. So pages 236 to 238, where we've drawn together effectively their recommendations from the survey respondents.
Okay, thank you. I'll go over to members for questions. So I'll go to the Vice Chair, David Hilditch, first, please.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, we've spoke about the ULVs, EVs, and the EVs. Was there any talk of the self-charging hybrids within the survey at all? Did anybody refer to that sort of?
Yeah, I can take that question. There was mention of it, so it wasn't something that the survey was designed to elicit responses about. So we really focused on sort of plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles. But the only time it came up was when respondents sometimes mentioned them. So some people say that they had self-charging hybrids. Other respondents were, say, EV drivers who talked about self-charging hybrids. I could take more questions about that specifically, but it was quite a small proportion of the responses that even mentioned them.
Yeah, okay, thank you. The correspondence to the survey then, you mentioned, I think it was a split between male and female, which was quite significant. When did you first notice that split?
I think discussing the results with Des as they were coming in, I think it was fairly clear really from the beginning of the survey once it opened, but obviously very clear when the survey closed and all the results were in. But
there wasn't an opportunity to try and address that?
In terms of targeting female drivers, for example? Yeah. I don't know if perhaps the clerk or the committee team might be able to advise on how the survey was communicated to the general public. I think it was made generally available. I'm not sure if we did perhaps make efforts along the way to address sort of missing sectors of the population.
So that's the days first, for instance, as a committee member, I was aware of that, to be honest, so it's news to me this morning, and it is quite a differential in figures there.
It is, yeah.
We did go out to community organisations and try and promote it in areas where we were underrepresented, but that's the best we got.
Yeah. I mean, it isn't a survey that was like a poll where you would try and get a weighted survey. It was essentially self-report, self-identifying respondents.
I understand. They're all users at the end of the day, but what evidence supports the claim that most respondents living in sort of the terrace type, and there's about a third of Northern Ireland's housing stock are contained within terrace type houses and flats, dwellings that would be unable to install a home charger? Was that a major concern within the survey?
Yeah, I'll comment on that. Thank you for the question. Yes, so this was raised by many of the respondents directly. So, for example, many of the non-owning EV respondents said things like, well, I would really like an electric vehicle, but I live in a small terrace house without a dedicated parking space, or I live in a flat and I can't even park on my street sometimes. And so how would I have my own home charger? So this was directly from the respondents.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. We now go over to Cathal Boylan.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank Don and Darrell for the presentation. Also, extend my best wishes to Des as well. I hope he recovers soon. He's been a big member of the reporting to this committee for a long number of years. But listen, thank you very much for the report. I mean, obviously there's some good information in it, and which may not be reflected right across the board. I think there's something there we can use as a committee. Darrell, I just want to get on because clearly the report talks about range anxiety, and I mean, you heard Mr. Hilditch talk there about the male-female ratio. The most important thing is for anybody driving the vehicle is having the confidence that you got the range and having the confidence in the system. And clearly, the charge network points, especially here in the north, wouldn't be up to standard, wouldn't be up to speed. And we can see we've asked different questions of the department to try and bring that about through ESB and everything else. But my main question was, given the fact that we seem to have a slightly poor quality of network, and going by the evidence we have across the board in terms of our jurisdictions, I mean, how does that relate in terms of range anxiety, and how are all the jurisdictions dealing with it? Because I mean, we need to instill confidence if you're going to encourage people to buy vehicles, you know what I mean? So just reflect, if you can reflect across the report in range of some of that, please. Thank you.
Yeah. So range anxiety, as you point out, it's a really key factor, and it came up time and again in the survey. We didn't do any work into sort of different jurisdictions on that, so the information was purely Northern Ireland drivers. I think the most we could say from the data is that some respondents indicated that they have driven in other jurisdictions. So they've driven in either the Republic or GB, and had more positive experiences in them, and then sort of compared Northern Ireland's infrastructure disfavourably compared to that. But I think that was the only place that came up in the data.
Chair. No, I appreciate that. I mean, if you've outlined the targets in the 2030 and 2035, I mean, if we're serious about it, besides all the costs, which the cost EVs are expensive, I mean, we need to be installing a proper system there for encourage people to do that. And I mean, that the technology is getting better, but obviously it's down to the price of the vehicles and everything else. So, I mean, clearly, probably a provision of fast charging would be the way to go, because you've mentioned in the survey there the lack of charging stations, range anxiety, long recharge times, and also cost. And I mean, those are four major factors that wouldn't instill confidence in people. But we've a way to go. But I think we made a good start, and there's good stuff in the report. But just in terms of a fast charging infrastructure, would that be the way to go? Is that what we're talking about here in terms of coming out of the report, and how we would actually address some of the problems that we face? Because a lot of us are keen to move forward with this. I mean, besides all the policy issues, we would be keen to try and drive this forward. So just those points. Thank you very much.
Yes, very, very much so. So this is the capacity of the chargers. So how quickly can you charge a vehicle? So as I understand it, there are sort of three different types of or rates of charger. So you have the slow chargers, and they spend many hours. Then you have fast, which might be a couple of hours, and then rapid. So rapid would be sort of half an hour, and you get most of your battery charged. And this was another thing that respondents talked about. So in terms of the EV owners, a lot of them said, well, I can just about charge my vehicle, when I can find a working public charger, but they're quite slow. So I might have to spend, hours waiting around for my vehicle to charge, and queues could build up. So that does indicate that, rapid chargers are definitely, a good option. And the EV owners the EV non-owners, to some extent recognised that. I don't think they were quite as aware of the technical detail, but they basically said, I would expect to be able charge my vehicle in under half an hour.
Yeah, no, thank you. And just a final point, because it's not going to be a one size fits all. It's going to be public points. Like, whilst you will see the challenge that home charge is going to face in some areas and some. So we're going to need a mixture of public charge points and that's to encourage people. But listen, thank you very much for your report. Like I say, pass on our regards to Des, and thank you for Dan and Darren for coming along. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We now go for Martina, and then we will have Roy, followed by Liz, and then followed by Keith, in that order.
Thank you, Chair, and can I too send my best regards to Des, and to thank you for the presentation and for the information we received. I suppose it's not surprising for any of us to hear that the lack of affordability of buying an electric car has been a big issue shown up in the survey. Can I ask, was there any responses from the survey about the impact of the British government decreasing the grant funding for electric cars? Now, my understanding is this year it has been reduced from £3,000 to £2,500, and although these vehicles would still be quite expensive, the grant allows for some level of support. So surely if the plan is to ban the sale of petrol and diesel cars, and if you want people to buy them, as people to buy them, to take up EVs, then such support from a grant would be necessary. You'd want to see that increasing, not falling.
Yes. So in terms of the survey, so did people reference the loss of the grant? Yes. This came up with some respondents. So I think. Yeah, you have to forgive my memory. I know it was hundreds of comments and trying to summarise them, but probably a small proportion of particularly the non-owners who would like to own an EV did reference this. So this did come up, and there was, they expressed disappointment that wouldn't be available, because as you say, that does help towards the purchase price. But beyond that, we didn't ask a specific question about that policy or that change.
Okay, no, when I was listening to what you had said about the stages, of the responses and how you outlined them, I thought that the first one being cost, that would feature, and I'm sure it will as time will go forward. I also note that the survey indicates that most responses and most of the respondents were from the east counties, but I'd like to stress, so that you're aware, that the West is just in much need of decent charge point network. In fact, in Derry, we have been looking at the charging points here, and they're an absolute disgrace. And I had written not just to the Minister, but also looking at the Electricity Supply Board about replacing the broken charging points. So it just seems to me a massive contradiction. On the one hand, we're talking about banning, which is needed in terms of petrol and diesel cars. We're also looking at the cost of them. And then we have an infrastructure in terms of charge point networks across the north that are certainly not fit for purpose. So whilst it all sounds good in the encouragement that we're given to people, there are very few people, I can tell you, in the Bogside and Derry and around Derry that would have space for home charging. So if we're really serious about taking this forward, then we do need to look at the network and find a mechanism through which the charge point networks are maintained and upgraded.
Thank you, Martina. Could we now ask Roy for a question? Okay, again, thanks for your update. 742 responses. I think that's quite a good response. What's your impression of? I would have thought even if the department got that sort of level of responses, they'd be quite pleased. So, what is your professional view of it?
Yeah, it is a good number of responses, in the sense that, as I said earlier, it gave us a really good range, particularly in the comments. It's 0.04% roughly of the population. It's smaller than, for example, NISRA's continuous household survey would be 11 to 1,200. More respondents would have been helpful. But it is a good solid body of data for us to look at public attitudes to electric charging, certainly.
Yeah, and I agree with you. The quality of the comments that have been made has been very useful. It's reinforced the impression, certainly, that I had achieved from previous reports. Chargers the wrong type, still old chargers, faulty, some locked at night, essentially chargers in the wrong place, very few available in filling stations as developed elsewhere already. In terms of mapping locations, that's a key issue to be aware of where there are working chargers. Who has responsibility for that? Have you been able to find that out?
I don't know. That's something we'd have to come back to you on in terms of mapping. I mean, there are services available like ZapMap, for example, which will provide you with a map of services and give you an indication of which chargers are in use at any one time. How reliable the data is at any one time on that service or on any of the others is maybe something we'd have to look into. But Chair will be happy to come back and further information on that.
And in terms of this feedback that you've received, did you pick up from respondents any tips that they have been able to pick up from elsewhere? Why exactly are we so far behind other parts? I mean, I saw one comment that free to use is doomed to failure. Obviously, if there's no incentive for someone to spend money and be able to recoup that expenditure, they're not going to repair it, and that's essentially what's happened. So did you pick up any other comments or any lessons that respondents may have been aware of elsewhere which have seen the success in other parts of the United Kingdom?
Yeah, that's I mean, that sort of deeper context of the comparison with other jurisdictions is something that it would have been really advantageous for us to get to. Chair, we're very happy to come back with further research on making those comparisons with public attitudes in other jurisdictions. But Darryl, do you recall any comments about users' experiences from other places?
There was very little. So I think I previously referred to in an answer some experience of driving in the Republic and in GB, which is generally more positive, but there was very little information about that, and that was not something we asked specifically, no.
You were indicating that some saw the cost of the Eevee electric vehicle being a barrier. Was there recognition of there's considerably lower running costs and ultimately monthly costs could still be a positive incentive even at this moment in time?
Yeah, I think that was referred to, wasn't it, Darryl?
It certainly was. So there's a section where we asked the respondents about the advantages and disadvantages of owning an Eevee, and it did certainly come up with, I think it was 58% of respondents said that low operating costs are great. So once you've managed to fork out the money for an Eevee, and assuming you can run it well, then actually they are quite cheap to run. That could be higher, perhaps. Around 40% of people then kind of didn't recognise that as a factor. So perhaps that is something to look into.
Just a final comment. I think it's been very useful, and there's follow-ups that we need to the department and the minister following this.
Okay, thank you, Roy, and your contempt for the officials to come back on those number of points that you raised.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Liz, for a question?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry I was late this morning. Something else came up. So welcome you to your first meeting. Thank you both. I mean, it's been a very informative presentation. I think it's really good. And I too wish to send my best wishes to Des. I know Des has done an awful lot of work on this. Just a couple of questions I have, and it's probably leading on from some of the other points. Just firstly, I know my colleague Martina had raised in relation to people living in housing where they wouldn't, for example, terraced houses or flats where they wouldn't be able to install home chargers. Were there any responses from people who lived in those types of settings about the inability of home charging? Did they offer any opinion in, suggesting maybe having a greater focus on public charging stations around those areas?
Yeah, I don't know, Darryl, was that something that came up in the survey? Was people who living in terraced housing, for example, looking at the public charging infrastructure and having to rely on the public charging infrastructure around them. Do we have any comments on that?
Yes, I think there were a few comments. I mean, there were certainly some. There are some EV owners who do live in, say, terrace and flats. There were very few. I don't have the figure off the top of my head, but it was a handful of people who have sort of managed to afford an EV and then find a place to charge it at home. And I think the only thing I can recall is that they found it very difficult. So I wasn't quite sure whether they had managed to get a dedicated space for a home charger, or whether they're relying on public charging infrastructure. But I do recall they found it very difficult.
Yeah, no, I suppose. Yeah, no, thank you. And I mean, as others have said too, a lot of the complaints are around the current charge points maybe not being in the right place. So was there any feedback or much feedback on why they were considered poorly placed and how they could be maybe more strategically installed?
Yeah, so again, this was something that we didn't have specific questions on, but came out in the comments. When we opened the floor to the respondents, I think a lot of them made reference to the fact that they're not on sort of key motorways, so they're key routes that don't have enough chargers. So yes, perhaps probably a strategy is needed to put them in the optimal places.
Yeah, and I know we've raised this at committee before. I mean, we would certainly be suggesting that the department looks at encouraging councils to draw down some of the funding as well that's available for the charging scheme, because I know certainly I cover Newry and there's very limited chargers, and like other areas sometimes they're not working and all of those things. So if we can encourage councils to draw down that money, I think it would certainly help with some of the issues that have come out in this. The last point, just in relation to the points in the survey around where it said 23% of the current non-EV owners intended to buy an EV as their next vehicle. Do we have any comparative figures from other areas in relation to the demand for EV cars as their next purchase? And if not, is that something that we could look at and maybe get some data on as well?
Chair, we'll be very happy to come back with that information to look at other jurisdictions on that, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Thank you very much. Thanks both of you. That was very helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Liz. And there's a couple of points there that we'll hopefully be hearing back from the team on. Finally, over to Keith. Okay,
thank you, Chair. Thanks, Don and Darren. Appreciate your efforts. And pass on my regards. No doubt the one regards to Des will cover everybody. Do that, that'd be good. Just obviously the whole theme in this, or what I say, is chargers. And I would support of a Verizon's point, and I'm not putting you can use a simple map to indicate where the charges are in Northern Ireland. And I don't know how you find out up to date what's working or not. I think the last conversation we had at a meeting, I think it was at 25%. I'm going from memory here of what charges was not working. I'm guessing that figure, but there was a fairly high figure of percentage of charges not working. So it'd be good to get a map, obviously across Northern Ireland, to see what charges is where and types of chargers, whether they're fast, slow, whatever. But I'm stuck, and Roy did touch on it. He must have read my notes regarding this. A free-to-use network. What's your thoughts? And I appreciate you can't influence, but what's your thoughts on the free-to-use network of chargers?
I suppose it's difficult for us to comment on the policy around that and the advantages of that. Maybe the most helpful thing we can do is to look at the way in which other jurisdictions have handled that in terms of those who have transitioned from a free-to-use network into various different kinds of paid scheme and where they are at with that and what the successes are like. There may well be commentaries that could be helpful to the committee that we'll be happy to have a look at.
No, it'd be good to roll that together.
I agree with that. So, although, it's not my opinion, but something that the respondents volunteered was comments regarding the free-to-use charging network. And essentially there was a mix of opinions. So some people thought it was brilliant. Hey, free charging, this is fantastic. But then on the other hand, a lot of respondents said, you know what, I'd rather pay. It would be much better to have a paid for network that was properly maintained. And so I think that's definitely a question for the department to look at. But in terms of the respondents, I don't think they were pointed to one particular model.
Okay, just a final point. I just see that a respondent has referred here to the department on page 236, the bottom one of the paragraphs. Department for Infrastructure need to get their act into gear if we have any hope of being ready for the fossil fuel vehicle ban. I think that sums it up. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, fair point. So that's all of members' questions, and obviously there's some engagement there that we need to hear back on, and no doubt we will. So can I thank both Dan and Darrell for attending the committee this morning, and we look forward to hearing you in the days and weeks ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, members.
Thank you.
Okay, members, our next departmental briefing will be from the Driver and Vehicle Agency, MOTs and driving tests, and we will wait for the officials to come into the room.
Good morning.
Welcome. Okay. Could I, on behalf of the committee, welcome Mr. Jeremy Logan, Chief Executive of the Driver and Vehicle Agency, and Mr. Pat Delaney, Director of Operations, Driver and Vehicle Agency, and I think we have, yes, Mr. Mike Beer, Director of Business Improvement and Corporate Services, Driver and Vehicle Agency. Gentlemen, you're very welcome to the committee this morning. Obviously, this is an issue of great concern for the committee at present, and I understand we have two departmental briefings, but your presentation's rolled into one. So I would ask for you to give the full presentation now, but for members in terms of questioning, could we focus the first part of questioning particularly on MOT and driving tests, and then following that round we will then have specific questions on the PSC report and action plan. Okay? So without, do you want to point in before that, David?
Yes, sorry, Chair. I had asked last week that I could ask some questions in relation to taxi enforcement.
Okay.
And the committee had agreed to that, and I'm quite happy to tag it on at the end if that's...
Okay, we can put that down for a point of note at the end.
Thank you.
Okay, so without further ado, I'd ask, I think it's Jeremy, to lead off with the presentation to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you for your invitation to come to the committee today to provide an update on DVA services. We have provided a briefing paper for the committee in advance of today's session, and I will draw out a few points from the paper about the current position. As is the case with many other public-facing services, COVID-19 has had a significant impact on DVA, particularly vehicle and driver testing services. We have conducted an extensive review of our risk assessments, and these are regularly reviewed to ensure they take account of the latest public health advice and guidance to ensure the safety of our staff and customers. Inevitably, this has meant that our testing capacity has been reduced as we continue to ensure the necessary and proportionate controls for COVID are in place, such as hand sanitisation, social distancing and the wearing of face coverings. We know that this has caused disruption to our customers, and we continue to work hard to mitigate against this. In terms of MOT services, vehicle testing is taking place at all 15 test centres, and the statistics published yesterday confirm that in May we operated at around 76% of our normal vehicle testing capacity. This morning the Minister announced our plans to return to full vehicle testing capacity from the 26th of July. To do this, temporary exemption certificates for qualifying vehicles will be extended by 1 further month. This will allow us to move back to the 20-minute test template and manage the demand for vehicle tests when exemption certificates begin to expire. It is important for owners to understand that it remains their responsibility to make sure their car is maintained in a roadworthy condition to be used on a public road. Motorists should also ensure their vehicles are checked and prepared before they are presented for MOT. They should not use the MOT as a means to identify any defects on their vehicles that need repaired. Turning to driving tests, following the easing of COVID restrictions, driving testing resumed on the 23rd of April. As announced by the Minister, there was a phased reopening of the booking service based on the expiry dates of theory test pass certificates, and we directly contacted those customers in phases 1 and phases 2 to advise them how and when they could access the booking system. The booking service opened to all customers on the 10th of May, providing everyone with a valid theory test pass certificate equal opportunity to book an appointment, regardless of their test pass history or previous priorities. As expected, there has been high demand for bookings. In May, we received over 15,300 applications for a driving test appointment, the highest level of applications ever recorded in a single month. In line with plans to maximise our resources to deliver driving tests, we conducted almost 5,500 driving tests in May, 35% higher than the previous 5-year average for May. Private cars accounted for 4,661 of these tests, with the remainder spread across various categories, including lorries, buses and taxis. Driver theory testing also resumed on the 23rd of April, and once again demand was high following the suspension of this service for almost 4 months. The 10,058 theory tests conducted in May was the highest number ever recorded, compared to the previous May average of 4,851. An additional temporary test centre, which is located in Ballymena, opened on Monday the 14th of June and can provide around 1,000 test slots per week, and this should alleviate pressure on demand for this service. In terms of the financial position, I can advise that the agency ended 2021 in a much stronger financial position than might have been anticipated. The agency successfully secured allocations of resource funding totalling $31 million to address the loss of fee income arising as a result of the pandemic and some additional costs. The agency also secured $10 million funding for the reinstatement of reserves that had been withdrawn from the trading fund in 2008-2009 by its former department, the DOE. The pandemic continues to impact on this year's financial position. The estimated loss of fee income due to the restricted vehicle testing is in the region of $5 million, and additional costs of $1.85 million have been forecast. These pressures have been registered with the Department in the recent COVID funding exercise and as part of the June monitoring round. Finally, in respect of the vehicle lift issues recently reported by the Public Accounts Committee, I want to assure the Committee that work to progress the actions identified from the independent reviews commissioned by the Minister is well in hand. We have one remaining substantive action to complete, which relates to agreeing the design and specification of new lifts with the supplier and conducting performance testing, which is scheduled to be completed in May 2022. We're happy to take any questions you may have today.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jeremy. I suppose probably this is an issue which has caused great concern, and I'm talking now specifically probably in first point about the driving test plans. There is a grave concern out there among the community as to how we address this backlog caused by COVID. During the 2020-21 financial year, the DVA conducted 9,502 driving tests, yet the previous year this number was 55,443. This is a decrease of 83%. So I suppose from a committee perspective, from an elected member's perspective, we are yet to be convinced that the department and the DVA have a sufficient plan in place to address this backlog at present. We're hearing day and daily from constituents contacting us about how this is having an increasingly negative impact upon their life. They've obviously had the restrictions of COVID. They want to contribute to their family households, unable to get a test. Some then do get a test and unfortunately fail. They're then thrown out of the system, having to reapply, and that reapply appointment process could be 3 to 4 months away. We know the anxiety that can cause. We know the costs and that can cost to young people that are trying to contribute to their family household. So I suppose what I would like to hear today is, where is DVA with the recruitment process of additional examiners? Has that been looked at in detail? Is there any other ways in which we can approach this, whether that's taking on additional perhaps temporary driving instructors to facilitate some of those examiner spots, to ensure that we can get this backlog dealt with expediently, to ensure that we can return to some form of normality in relation to driving tests?
Okay, well, I'll start, and Pat can maybe add some detail around some of the operations. Throughout the restriction of driving tests and indeed driving instruction due to the COVID regulations, we have been planning to recruit as many examiners as we possibly can. We have the dual role examiners that we use to provide vehicle testing and driving testing, and one of the main and the quickest ways that we could put those guys forward for driving test was to get the majority of those temporarily promoted to do full driving tests when the service resumed. And of the 38 dual role examiners that we have, 31 of them have been temporarily promoted up till the end of September so that they can deliver and focus the majority of their time on delivering the driving test service. We've also been recruiting additional vehicle examiners and putting them through training for driving examining, and that started on the 26th of April. Unfortunately, due to the restrictions, training couldn't happen in car until they were lifted on the 26th of April, so that commenced immediately after the restrictions were eased. And we have gone out for competition to recruit examiners again. It was advertised on the 26th of April, and the interviews for those competitions are due to happen next month, which will hopefully put us in a place to make appointments for new driving examiners at the end of August. So in the interim, I say we have put our resources, all the available resources that we've had forward, and as the figures from May show, there has been a 35% increase in the number of tests that we have conducted. Before the booking service opened, we estimated that there was 22,000 people who had a valid theory test pass certificate that had not yet booked a test. And between April and the end of October, for the slots that have been released to date, we've released over 22,000 slots, and we are certainly continuing to put on more tests when the examining resource becomes available.
Okay. Do you believe the additional resources that you're putting in place, whether that be additional booking slots and additional examiners, will address this backlog? And what's the benchmark for the DVA in relation to getting this number under control?
Well, I suppose there is no benchmark in terms of this is exceptional circumstances. We've never been in this position before. Our focus has been maximising the number of tests that we can deliver and looking at how many resources we can put forward into delivering tests and also operating tests on evenings and on Saturdays and on Sundays. So really through the use of overtime and using our examiners outside normal working hours, we are trying to deliver as many tests as we possibly can. We would need to analyse the figures that come through. Obviously not everybody, and you pointed it out, not everybody passes their test first time, so we need to look at the test pass rate for both the driving test and the theory test to see how that is panning out. And we also need to consider then the applications that are coming through the system. I think we will have a better picture in the coming months to see how quickly and how soon we'll be able to get out of the backlog of driving tests. But I think we have made an excellent start through the efforts of the guys on the ground and the management teams that have put in place the efforts to take this forward. And certainly there is more slots being released on a regular basis when resources become available.
What COVID measures are still in place, if any, that are preventing a resumption of full provision? And what specific impact are they having, and how is that being mitigated against?
Well, there is COVID controls. Obviously, social distancing in the cars cannot be maintained, so the face covering is one of the mandatory requirements. There's obviously sanitisation of the vehicle, and indeed meet and greet has been slightly disrupted, in terms of the time it takes to engage with the candidate at the test centre before they go out and test. So on a normal basis, we would deliver 7 tests per day. That is currently sitting at 6. But we have offered the permanent examiners an extra half hour to do the 7th test in the day, and a number of them have accepted that offer. So with all the examiners we have, we're delivering between about 6 and 9 tests per examiner per day of those that are rotated. I don't know if Pat wants to add anything more.
Add to that. The number of tests that we were able to conduct per driving examiner when we resumed driver testing in September, October of last year was very much limited by the health and safety risk assessments and the measures that we needed to put in place for COVID. But as those measures and restrictions were relaxed, then we were able to respond to that and respond to it reasonably quickly. So as Jeremy says, we're now up to 6 tests per day per full-time driving examiner. I have plans in place now to move that up to 7 tests and be working with trade unions and staff to do that as quickly as we possibly can. As Jeremy also says, we've got our dual role examiners, and they work a 12.5-hour shift per day, and they're doing 9 tests per day. And indeed, some of our full-time examiners have agreed to do 9 tests per day as well to help us out of it. We're now in the offering driving tests on a Sunday, which we'd never done before. We started that with heavy goods vehicles and buses at the 3 centres where those are conducted: Belfast, Craigavon and New Buildings. I've had the test routes in the other test centres assessed for Category B driving tests on a Sunday, and we'll soon be offering driving tests on a Sunday from between 11 AM and 12 PM to ensure that the integrity of the test isn't compromised, and that those candidates that are tested in road conditions that would be normal for a weekday test, and that will increase our capacity as well. We've also, as Jeremy pointed out, started to train a number of our own staff. The COVID restrictions limit the number of staff that we can train at any one point in time, so whereas we'd normally train around 6 new driving examiners in one cohort, that's limited now to 4, and the second cohort started training on Monday past, and we've another cohort to start again in September, and we've got the new full-time examiners coming in September. So that competition was launched on the 26th of April and closed just a few weeks ago, and we had over 300 applications for driving examiners, so we've got quite a pool of people to draw from. But that process isn't simple and straightforward. There are a number of measures that are involved in that recruitment process which are unique to a driving examiner, so that we get the right calibre of person for that role. But we were hopeful that we would have them in post by early autumn, and that would start then to reduce the backlog. But I'm very encouraged with where we are now. I am very restricted in what I can say in terms of what the statistics are for the month of June, as they're covered by Office of National Statistics protocols. And just in case the Chief Statistician is looking, I'm not giving anything away. It's just that I'm very encouraged with the statistics.
Okay. So, given the huge backlogs that we have and the inadequate waiting times for some of those young people, do you think it's fair that for those that sit in a queue to get their driving test and fail, that they then have to go to the back of the queue again to reapply? Do you think that's a fair system, or do you think we can find a way by which those people that, for example, have been in that queue for months, unfortunately fail their test? Is there a way or an ability that those slots can be provided for those people without them necessarily being put out of the system to have to reapply for months down the line?
They're not out of the system, and they're not in the queue. Okay. Neither of those two things exist. When they fail their driving test, they apply for a driving test again. It's not a retest, it's a new test, and it's exactly the same as someone who's applying for the test the first time. They have equal opportunity to apply for the test. So as additional test slots are made available at the centre of their choosing or at another test centre, they have equal opportunity to apply for that test. One of the things that we have seen recently are people who have failed the test more than once. In one case, we have an individual who's failed the test 3 times, and their parent is complaining that they can't get their 4th test quick enough. I've seen the failure sheet for that, and the X's on it are very reminiscent to a spot the ball competition. The person isn't ready, and we find that there are a number of people who are not ready for test. And if they were to wait that little bit longer and do their test, the likelihood is maybe they would pass first time. But we're finding that there are a number of people in the system who have done their first test and had 2 or 3 tests after that. It is disappointing for us that someone can't get a test in a relatively quick time after they fail the first test. But looking at our statistics, at the moment we're looking at a waiting time of around 10 weeks. So that would be the maximum right out to the end of October. But as I say, every single week, in fact, every single day, our test centres are adding additional test slots to their booking templates. And once those become available, they are open to everyone. So whenever they go onto the call centre or they go onto our online booking service, they will be available to them. At the moment, we are not prioritising anyone. The system is open to everyone on an equal basis.
I suppose that's my very point, that there is many young people out there, and anybody that's trying to get their driving test for legitimate reasons fail that first time. And in most cases, a quick turnaround of another test, it could be anything from confidence building to other measures, allow them to have the confidence to go forward and then pass. The feedback that I'm getting is that for them to be told to reapply in the normal procedure that you have outlined, puts them sometimes months away, more additional cost to that family, and also they lose confidence. And what I'm asking you, is there a way by which those people can be facilitated to ensure that we're not putting added costs on families, to ensure that the confidence and our mental well-being for those people that are applying for that test we can all work together to achieve the same objective here. I think that system is unfair.
And it could be said that to introduce that system for someone who has failed the test, that they're given a priority for a second test, is equally unfair to someone who has yet to do their first test, who may well have the same needs.
I would accept that principle, but my point stands that I think given the huge waiting times that those people have had to go through to get their first test, I think the system is unfair, that they're automatically, if they fail, that they're automatically put on.
And the point that we put across to our customers and our candidates and to the ADIs is only apply for the test when your candidate is ready to do the test. Apply for the test, get your first date. We make available appointments on a regular basis. As I say, every day and every week there are additional appointments going into the appointment slot, and then you apply for an earlier date. But get your first date, and then you work back from where that is as more and more appointments become available.
Okay.
Well, I think we have seen that there's indications that people have been able to get multiple tests even in the relatively short period of time since testing resumed, and a part of that is down to the perseverance of the individual and the flexibility they show in terms of where they're prepared to take their tests. So there's evidence that people are taking their tests in different centres just to get an early appointment, and I suppose if they have reached the standard for driving, that's perfectly reasonable. They should be able to take their test at any of the centres that are available to them. So there's definitely indications that if people persevere, and as Pat says, more appointments are coming on, they will be able to secure another test date much sooner than the average waiting time.
Okay, and finally, because I want to throw this open to members, in relation to MOT, if I apply for an MOT today, when would I be offered a test? If I apply for, in the same sense, if I apply for a driving test today, when would I be offered a test on average?
From memory, from the statistics at the end of last week, the average waiting time for a vehicle test across the network is around about 25 days. And the average waiting time for a driving test across the network is 78 days. I'd have to come back and confirm that in writing, but that from memory, those are the numbers that I remember.
Okay.
I think MOT reminder letters, they're currently issuing at 6 weeks in advance of your appointment date, so if you book early you should be able to secure an MOT test at a centre, and hopefully one of your choosing, your local centre.
But I get the stats every single morning. There are vehicle test slots available at every test centre across the network at the moment.
Okay. Thank you. I had it over to members, so I have Keith first, then followed by David, Martina, Liz, Ahal and Roy at this stage.
Okay, Jeremy, Pat and Mike, thank you very much for that, and the Chair's covered a lot of points on obviously vehicle testing. What capacity have you left between now, approximately, Jeremy, Pat, and October, roughly? So how many slots for driver testing is there between now and October left? So is there people in the system now that has a date in October? So that would indicate to me there's no capacity between now and October. Clarify that.
The figures, they obviously change, Keith, on a regular basis. There's approximately 1,200 slots still available in the system, and most of them would be in September and October. But as Pat says, we put on more templates when the resource becomes available, so there is a changing position. There is more slots going in June and July and August. But at the minute on the system, there's about 1,200 slots that haven't been booked yet.
For many people between now and say September, October, it's sitting in the queue waiting on a test.
Just a second.
Can I just clarify when you say the queue?
Well, waiting to do their driving test.
In terms of how many tests have actually been booked?
Yes.
At the 1st of June, we had approximately 13,500 Category B tests in the system.
What is the department doing? That's 13,500. We heard this morning on the radio where 150 odd kids, I think it is today, can't get a place, and there's a lot of shouting, and rightly so. Children need to be sorted out. what is the department doing about the mental health, those 13,000? And those are generally now young people trying to get to their work, trying to get further education. What's the department doing to try and help those people in the mental health? I've had mothers on to me crying, young people on crying, day and daily.
If I could just say the 13,500 are people who have a test booked between the 1st of June and the 30th of October. So for the vast majority of those between now and the end of August, most of them I think would be quite content with that date. It's the September and the October people who are maybe would like an earlier date. As we put on additional lists, those people that have the earlier date tend to come forward and pick up the earlier template, which frees up more dates in September and October. So what we're trying to do is put on as much capacity as we possibly can to address the backlog. And as the statistics for May show, we actually put on 35% more capacity than the 5-year average to address the backlog. And our aim is to improve on that month on month over the coming months.
So you're roughly saying that you've roughly a 30-35% increase per day?
35% increase
over the month.
Over the month.
And I say, without saying too much about June, we would hope, that that we will go on a similar trend in terms of that increased capacity for delivering the tests.
Back to the chair's point, and I know the point he was making in regard to if an individual goes for the test, there's obviously serious pressure doing a driving test. Even in my day, I'm not going to tell you what happened in mine, but even on back 2 years ago, there's serious pressure. There's serious pressure now because they have to pass. Because if they know they don't pass, they could wait 4 months. And I think young people, is the department doing any slight, not saying any compensation for that? Person can be nervous, but the fact now there's serious pressure on them because they know if they fail, they're waiting 4 to 5 months.
What I would say, Keith, is that our driving examiners are very experienced and professional and qualified in what they do. And a driving examiner will know if we're within the first half a mile whether that person is going to pass the test or not, or if they need to give them a wee bit more time. So there's an element of discernment on the part of the examiner, so they help them along. We will not drop our standards in terms of the driving test. This is a road safety issue, and agree, I've said to my driving examiners, I can forgive you for failing somebody that should have passed, but I really don't ever want to hear you passing someone that should have failed. It's just too big a risk to allow that to happen. So, whilst they will keep the standards for the driving tests at all times, they will exercise their judgment because they know that this is a different situation that we're in, and where the benefit of the doubt allows, the examiner will give the benefit of the doubt to the candidate.
So when do you see then you being back at pre-COVID times? So jump back 2 years ago, what was the average waiting time on a driving test roughly? So from my book to today, how long would it be? You talked about 78 days. What was it prior to COVID?
Between 4 to 6 weeks.
Right. So when do you see being at that point? So in other words, the 78 days coming down.
At the moment, we don't have enough data to make an assessment on that.
But if you have the figures of people, and sorry for interrupting you, if you have the figures of people that has done the written test, as I call it, or the theory test, do you not see what's coming in the system?
Well, we do. In actual fact, the theory test is quite interesting because in the last, in May, there were 10,058 theory tests done, which was the highest number we've done in a single month. And of that, 8,582 or 85% were for Category B. But if we use the last figure that we have for a full year in terms of the pass, the last full year's figure for passing the theory test was 46.3%. So that would mean then that 3,970 people in May passed the theory test. So that's a figure that we would work from. And as we've said, we're doing over 5,500 tests. But what we want to see is the volumes of driving tests increase. Jeremy mentioned earlier that we're using our dual role examiners. Because of the COVID restrictions, because of the relaxation, those dual role examiners were already committed to vehicle tests. So we're only really beginning to see the benefit of them towards the end of May. So June will give us a better indication as to the number of driving tests that we can do in a given month. So once we have all of the data in terms of the inputs, we'll then be able to estimate exactly, or roughly estimate, when we could see a path out of this to pre-COVID
If you
times.
look at your figure back there, I think it was May, you said was 5,500, which is 33% higher than you normally did. And then you've indicated there you have 3,900 theory tests, okay?
Yep.
So you're only nibbling into the backlog by 1,600. So it's a false pretense to give us a 5,500 figure. You're only eating into the backlog by 1,600.
But the point I'm making is that was May, that was our first month, and we haven't reached full capacity in terms of delivery. So once we get to the full capacity in terms of delivery of driving tests, then we start to see what our true outturn is per month, and that will give us a better indication as to when we'd be able to get through the backlog.
Okay, and then one just final question for me on MOTs. You referred to in your paper there regarding, I can't find it, regarding, yes, you're doing 76% capacity at the moment, okay, and you want to get up to 100% obviously, and you've put proposals for it to PHA, and you're hopefully going to be up at 100% by the end of the summer. What are those proposals, and why can they not come forward earlier?
Well, one of the things, the issue that we have is we're currently running on a 25-minute test template, so we can't actually get that volume into our test halls until we move down to a 20-minute template. So the first thing we're doing from the 26th of July is moving to the 20-minute template, but the further 1 month's extension to the temporary exemption certificate then allows us to work through the vehicles that are in the system, so that whenever the reminder notice issues for those vehicles that are going to be brought forward for tests from the 26th, 25th of August, that we'll have capacity in the network to allow us to accommodate them.
I think the other point too, Keith, is that we offer out our templates 3 months in advance, so they were booked out on 25-minute test templates. There was 1,000 booked into that in July. So to unpick that, while we were obviously concentrating on the delivery of driving tests, the flexibility of that extra month extension to the temporary exemption certificates certainly helps us manage the capacity in our test halls. But there's no question we have to refine our risk assessments. The customer is currently not in the car, and we're having to look at a suitable option to allow that to happen, and we will be engaging with our trade union colleagues and indeed PHA to take that proposal forward.
You're obviously in better control of MOTs for vehicles than you would be of you've a better average. So when do you see that 25 days coming down, and what is that going to be? What was the 25 days prior to COVID for a vehicle test?
If we go to just prior to our lifts failing on the 6th of January 2020, which is the best position we've been in many years, the waiting time was 9 days. So our aim is that over the period of the next number of months that we'll begin to work down the waiting time for vehicle tests. But vehicle tests it's slightly more difficult to estimate now, because the temporary exemption certificates has actually changed our operating profile. We had our peak demand period was from January until April, but by moving, giving the 4 months extensions, we've now pushed that peak demand period now out to July and August and into September, which also coincides with the annual leave period. So we're going to have to manage that very, very carefully over the summer months. But we would be hopeful that, and it's important that we're in that position by January of next year. So what we're doing at the moment is we're offering vehicle tests on a Sunday at all of our test centres. Bank holidays, the only 2 days this year, only 2 bank holidays that we haven't offered has been St Patrick's Day and the 12th of July. So we're working on every other bank holiday.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Keith. And before we take in our Vice Chair, there is mobile phones that are interfering with broadcasting, so could I ask members please to take that phone away from the mics, and also it's probably more likely that it is coming from one of the officials, so if you could also...
I turn mine off before I come in.
Just right. So
mine's upstairs.
So if anybody could just, it's interfering with broadcasting. So I'll put the next question over then to our Vice Chair, David Hilditch.
Thanks, Chair. And following on from your own line of question in relation to those who may have failed a test recently, you were operating a phase 1 and a phase 2 customer situation for priority. Are you telling us today that if they reapply, they could actually get in before the likes of the phase 2, which starts in the autumn time, or? Is that what you're...
No, the phase 1 and the phase 2 booking system was based on the expiry of theory test pass certificates. So before the booking system opened to all customers, phase 1 opened on the 26th of April and gave that phase 1 group exclusive access to the booking system for them to be able to book a test for the other customers came in, and similarly phase 2 with a different window for expiry dates. They were also offered exclusive booking after the phase 1 customers. So all of the phase 1 and phase 2 customers, and we'd written out to them all directly to advise them how and when they could book their test, had an opportunity to do that before the system opened on the 10th of May for everyone. So they should have had an opportunity to book a test in the system.
Okay, I was just wondering if there was an opportunity there for others to jump in, I suppose, at the end of the day. But, Jeremy, last time you were here, you told us normality would potentially be back, and you were given it around 6 months, and I know it was a guess. How would you view that now as moving forward?
6 months?
Well, I suppose there is an element of crystal ball gazing here, and we don't know obviously what way the epidemic is going to go. The reality is that at the minute we're delighted that we can start delivering our full services, and getting back to full service delivery, particularly in driving tests and vehicle tests, is an ambition we've had, and we're very hopeful that if things continue and the infection rates remain low, that in 6 months we would certainly in a very a much stronger position than we are. And I'd like to come back to the committee to report that the waiting times for driving tests and for vehicle tests are back to somewhere where we would expect them to be. But it is purely speculative, and I say if the figures that we have talked about so far come to pass and we can maintain that momentum, I think we can be reasonably optimistic that we will have made significant progress by then.
Okay, thank you. The agency have indicated that there was an extensive review of risk assessments over their properties and personnel. Has there been any incidents of COVID-19 infection which have been attributed to the department, whether it be through workforce or the service and facilities available? Has anything been closed down due to the COVID since we last met, or is
There has been no services that have closed down through infections in the workplace. We have had a number of staff, as you'd expect, when you have over 700 staff that have contracted the virus and that have had to self-isolate, and that has had some disruption to our operational delivery. But the risk assessments that we've put in place, be it the office-based risk assessments or those that are being used in the test centres through vehicle testing or driver testing, we have no incidents of a COVID outbreak attributed to the work environment.
That's good, thank you. And just finally, Pat, I heard you talking about the dual driving instructors. What distinguishes the dual driving instructors from the standard driving instructors?
Examiners. The difference is only that they conduct two roles. So they are either a member of our admin team, or they are a vehicle examiner, and what we do is we put them through, we send out an expression of interest seeking volunteers to become dual role driving examiners, which means that they conduct their vehicle examining duties or they conduct their admin duties, but on occasions, particularly during peak times, we then use those members of staff to deliver driving tests. But they go through exactly the same training as a full-time examiner, so that they have to meet the same standard.
Is that a lengthy process, or?
Yeah, it's a 4 to 5 week full-time training course, and it's set to the standards in the European Directive 2006/126, which is commonly known as the third directive on driver testing, driver licensing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. I'm now go over to Martina for a question.
Thank you, Chair. Can I go back to the issue of the message in terms of the DVA are sending to customers? Because as far as I understand, they're being advised to keep checking the booking system for availability. But some of the customers are telling me, and some of them I realise that they don't understand or realise that they should be checking it after initially being told that they have to wait months for a test. So how are you getting that message to customers to ensure that they're not missing the chance to have a test sooner? And could this be improved on what you've been currently doing?
Yeah, I suppose there's two aspects that we use our NI Direct site to make all the information about our services available and try and provide customer advice. I need to check to see the content and the specific content that you've raised is there to help customers, but we have also used our social media channels to get those messages out. But it's certainly something that I'm happy to take away and look at to see if there's any way we can improve the communications just to help those people know that they should continue to check the system for availability as more slots are being made available at all test centres when the resources permit.
We also make that information known to the approved driving instructors through their umbrella organisation, NIAC. So we've had quite extensive communication with NIAC this year on a number of occasions to keep them up to date as to where we are with the resumption of services. But one of the things that driving instructors are very, very well aware of is the need for customers to check the booking system for an earlier appointment, and that's the message that we would communicate through that network.
Yeah, it might be worth just checking that out, because I think an awareness raising campaign might help customers particularly can avail of getting a test sooner. And so I would appreciate just going back and checking on that. Can I ask you in relation to what's been previously raised about the possibility of online theory testing as a way of improving testing capacity? Now, when we spoke to the Minister about this, one of the things that she was concerned about was the possibility of this not being taken forward because of the test integrity concerns. However, in the South of Ireland, remote online testing has been made available for certain categories of drivers. So has there been any update on the EVA looking at the possibility of this? And if not, then what is the DVA's assessment of the South using, for instance, an online theory test for certain drivers?
Martina, I actually met with the Road Safety Authority in relation to this issue, and there's a very clear distinction between what we deliver and what they deliver in the South. The administration and delivery of the driving theory test in the UK is a joint authority contract between ourselves in the DVA and the Driving Vehicle Standards Agency in GB. Now, that test contains two components, a multiple choice section and a hazard perception section. Now, it's the hazard perception section which causes the greatest difficulty, in that the video clips that are used in our theory test in the hazard perception are of a very, very high definition and require very high specification PCs to deliver them. Now, the issue here would be that the technology wouldn't exist, particularly the broadband technology wouldn't exist in many rural communities to support the bandwidth that we would need for high specification hazard perception testing. And because the theory test is time bound, any delay in the test would result in the test timing out and then the student being recorded as a fail. The difference between ourselves and the South is this: in the South they use still images and require low bandwidth. So it's very, very easy for the South to do the online theory testing. The other difference between ourselves and the authorities in the South is that they publish their question bank. Ourselves and the DVSA and GB, our question bank is not published. And we don't publish it because we want to encourage people to actually read the material, to understand the material and then take the test, rather than just learn by rote. All I need to know is the answer. So the integrity of the test is incredibly important to us. The security element of the test is important to us, and the bandwidth and the high specification required to deliver the hazard perception element of the test would mostly prohibit the use of it.
But surely, being hit with a pandemic, some modifications could have been made. I'm conscious of what you said, joint contract, but the stark figures that you give to Keith about the numbers of people who are waiting on a theory test, and then the implications that this has happened, particularly for young people who are quite eager to get this stage of the process completed. It strikes me that a year on, that perhaps more could have been done to try to address that. And, I don't think that the integrity of the tests would have been impacted at all, given what governments had to do across the world with procurement and lots of other things that wouldn't have been the norm in normal circumstances. But during the pandemic, was there no way of getting online testing addressed so that we could even try to reduce the number of people who are waiting on a theory test, let alone do their driver's testing?
The short answer is no, there wasn't another way. And one of the constraints in even exploring that was that the current contract with the theory test service provider comes to an end this year, and we will be moving to a new theory test provider from the 4th of September. And as part of the contract specification and the tender negotiations, we explored the possibility of online proctoring, and it was ruled out at a very early stage by both of us. I say both, I mean DVSA and DVA, in that we weren't in the right place technologically to deliver that at the time. That's not to say that in the future we won't. It's only to say at this point in time it wasn't possible.
I think the other element to that is that we did bring in other suite of options forward in terms of extending theory test pass certificates for a period up to 12 months to allow those who were in danger of their pass certificate expiring before that an option to take a driving test. So that has been successful in keeping those people in a position where they can book a test. And the work that Pearson View, the current provider, as I said in my opening remarks, they've opened a new centre in Ballymena on Monday, and they conservatively indicate that they can deliver 1,000 tests from that site. So we'll obviously be keeping a close watch on how many tests that can be delivered, but if the figures for May are anything to go by, where they've delivered over 10,058 theory tests without that additional centre, by putting on additional hours and working additional times, hopefully that'll be able to manage any demand for theory tests over the coming months.
Okay, we'll keep a wee eye on that as a committee, and as you say, maybe get an update to see how things are standing at the end of the month. And I'm conscious of the temporary exemptions that you've given and a number of matters and a number of problems and concerns that people had. The most recent one that's coming to fore is about the need for a temporary suspension of the entry procedure to allow the taxi industry to play a role in the wider economy. And I know you're returning to some of the issues around the taxi industry, but given, according to recent figures released, that there has been a drop of sort of 809 taxi drivers, and I think there's somewhere in the region of 20 to 30% on top of that have not returned during the pandemic. So given the unmet demand for taxis at the weekend, is there any opportunity for yourselves to consider the temporary suspension of the entry procedure just to cater for the unmet demand and to deal with, as part of the COVID recovery, for the taxi industry to play its part?
I think ultimately those are matters for the Department and the Minister to consider. I mean, we deliver the operational testing for taxis, and there's nothing from an operational delivery perspective, be it vehicle tests, driving tests, theory tests, or indeed the processing of licences on our side is a blocker to the industry getting their licences. Any change to the entry requirements which would consider the likes of the theory test pass certificate or the requirement to carry out a practical driving test would be matters for the Minister to consider, but we would be more than happy to feed into those discussions with the Minister.
Okay, well, it's something I think you should perhaps take a look at and maybe feed into her, because it's being raised. When you talked about processing of licensing, have you also engaged with the Minister with regards to the cost, the licensing cost? For instance, for a number of sectors, last year there was a regulatory support for taxi drivers, such as the free renewal of their taxi vehicle licence. So has those conversations taken place between the DVA and the Minister?
Well, as you say, that regulatory support package, which I believe is worth 1.2 million to the industry to provide a 12-month free licence. Some of those licences started to expire, I think, from the 10th of March this year. But I'm certainly not aware of any further discussions around any regulatory easement around licensing packages at this point in time.
Okay, Chair, thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. We go to Liz now.
Thanks, Chair. And at this stage, there's probably very few questions left. So I've just got a couple. Just going back to the theory test. Apologies if I'm going over some of the ground that's been covered, but there has been an awful lot of information. One of the issues I had, and I know there's a massive backlog, but I know just a constituent, a young girl, who contacted me who had failed her theory test by like 1 mark. But when she tried to rebook, she did it last week. The next available appointment was November. So it's just to see, was there any any effort to try and even prioritise people like that, similar to, I know some of the other members talked about driving tests where someone had failed and couldn't get a slot booked or a retest booked quickly. Is there any work being done on that?
In terms of the theory test, if that person wishes to go on and change their theory test appointment date, they should find ample theory test appointment slots available in the Ballymena Test Centre.
Ballymena?
Yeah, it's a new centre that we opened in Ballymena to deal with the backlog, and that centre can accommodate up to 1,000 tests per week. Now, what we are finding is that people who have got later dates in the 6 established test centres are taking the earlier date in Ballymena, and that in turn is freeing up slots in the other 6 theory test centres. But it's the same message about going on and just checking for availability.
Okay, no, I'm assuming because it's from Newry, so I'm assuming that's maybe why that wasn't considered, but I can certainly bring that back. And the other, just as another point in terms of the extension of theory tests for anyone that's expired, I know it's in the briefing, there'll be an 8-month extension for those in that November 2020 to the end of June. And I just was a wee bit confused because it does mention about a booking system. Is that extension applied automatically, or do they need to go in and contact DVA?
The extension to the theory test pass certificate, that's applied automatically. In fact, it's already been applied, so they don't need to do anything. So, but whenever that theory test pass certificate expires at the new date, there'll be no further extensions.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure if they had to rebook for it as they are applying for it but I think it was more around the driving test slots. That's what it meant about the prioritising. That's grand. Just in relation to the tests, the driver tests and the temporary test centres that were to be put in place in areas such as Cookstown and Omagh, have both bookings already been made for those centres, or are they starting to open up slots for them? And will that include theory test as well as practical?
No, the 4 temporary test centres are for practical driving tests, and we will be opening them for appointments before the end of the month.
Okay, that's grand. And just my last point is just in relation to the waiting times. I know we said there, you give us an indication of what the waiting times were, and it said that it could depend centre to centre. Is there a rough estimate on that? And I mean, when you talk about change, it being different from centre to centre, is there an imbalance in the level of waiting, or are they somewhat the same across the board?
At the moment, they're broadly the same across the board. The larger test centres where we've got more driving examiners, for example, Belfast, there's more flexibility to create more slots. The like of Omagh, for example, where we're quite limited, which is why we're opening up a temporary test centre and reallocating resource to there. There's less opportunity for us to increase capacity. There is still opportunity, but there's less opportunity. But across the board at the moment, it's quite tight until the end of August.
Okay. And just in relation then to the additional slots that are being made available from now until August, do we have an idea how many there will be?
Sorry, Liz, didn't quite catch that.
Just in relation to the additional slots then that are being made available from now until the end of August, have we got a rough estimate of how many slots that will be?
Well, they're issued by the test centre on a daily basis, so I don't keep the slots per per centre. What I get is the number of slots across the network. So I would know how many slots across the network are issued on a daily basis, per day, per week and per month.
And would that vary?
It varies, yeah. It varies from day to day, and it depends on resource availability. And Jeremy mentioned earlier in terms of overtime, so where we have dual role examiners who are off shift, we ask if they would be prepared to come in and do driving tests whenever they're off shift. So that then releases another list. The big difference between driving tests and vehicle tests is that when we issue, God bless, when we issue short notice appointments for vehicle tests, they're snapped up in a heartbeat. But it's not the same for a driving test because there are more parts to that process in getting an approved driving instructor, to get lessons done beforehand, to get the use of a car. So short notice driving test appointments aren't always picked up as quickly as we would like. So we usually issue driving test appointments no less than 3 days before the test is due, to give people an opportunity to make arrangements to do the test.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much, you both. That's been very helpful. Thanks, Chair.
Sorry, if I could just clarify the point on the temporary centres, just to make sure that there's no confusion. Our plans are to open Cookstown and Oma by the end of this month. The temporary centres were really identified to provide a sort of like an overflow or an overspill from the main centres, where the capacity of those centres wouldn't allow the examiners and the pupils to come in. With Belfast, that's not so much of an issue, and Northwood, Coleraine, but the Oma and Cookstown, we're planning to release slots in the next week or so. So just to put that on record.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Liz. Go to Cahill now, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Jeremy and Pat. Chair, I know people have asked similar questions, but I just want to clarify something. Pat, in terms of, and I know previously you'd stated, or the department had stated, that they wanted to get up for 5,000 tests per month, and obviously clearly in May you've reached the 5,500. Can you tell me, just in terms of that, and I appreciate you're not allowed to give the June figures, so just in relation to what you've done in May, how many instructors was that, how many days a week was that right across the board to achieve that target?
That was every day for the Category B driving tests. That was every day in May, with the exception of Sundays.
And how many instructors carried all that out?
The examiners, well, we have 38 full-time examiners, and we have 38 dual role examiners. Although you can only work with half of them because they work split shifts. So that's the number that we're working from.
Fair enough. And in terms of your projections, and I mean, I'm mindful of what you said about June, but in terms of your projections of the number of driving tests that's coming forward, how many did you say there was in relation to that?
I didn't. I have to be careful about numbers. I'm just encouraged by what I'm seeing, Cahill.
No, and I appreciate the figures. I asked in the context of, because you said you were training up people for later on in the year in terms, and I'm just trying to get some bottom book figures in terms of how many people you're going to train up, how you intend to address those figures coming forward. Well, that's all I ask. So that a different way. Okay. In terms of the number of new examiners that you propose to bring forward, can you indicate how many of those?
Yeah, our first cohort, we had 4 examiners in training, but only one of them passed. That examiner is now in the test centre and operating. We have another cohort of 4 which started training on Monday of this week, and I'll get an assessment on Friday as to whether or not they're looking good for reaching the standard. And we have 10 new full-time examiners coming on board, probably get their letters of offer in August. But the point I was making earlier on was that a lot of our dual role examiners were already committed to delivering vehicle tests in May, and we're only seeing the benefit of those dual role examiners now towards the back end of May and into the early part of June. So we'll certainly see the benefit of having all of our dual role examiners delivering the 9 tests per day in the June figures.
Sound, and it's like I say, all the members and I see the chair was making a case for certain people redoing doing the test, and I appreciate that you've indicated there's some positivity in what you've seen in June already. But maybe to both you and Jeremy, just in terms of those people in terms of the theory tests who were cancelled during COVID and they had to go down this route of the placeholder appointment process, there seems a wee bit of confusion on whether or not when they went to confirm the appointment or they weren't really locked in terms of having the test date locked on. Has that issue been resolved or is that still an ongoing issue?
It's resolved.
It's resolved, okay. So the numbers are complete, so you're working through all that. But listen, look at all the other questions we've asked already, so thank you, Chair, and thanks to Pat and thanks to Jeremy.
Okay, thank you, Cathal, and we'll go for the final question on this round to Roy.
Again, like others, I get the impression that the MOTs are more under control, but has that been achieved given the flexibility you have with the 2-year testing? Is that one of the main issues that you're able to get up to date with it? I noticed actually my own test has moved from August just to December, just when we were in the course of the meeting. I thought I would check it out. So.
Well, certainly the temporary exemption certificates have been a big help. They've been a necessity to manage the testing capacity, and as you say, they're automatically applied, and I'm glad to see that yours has been automatically applied, Roy. So yes, that is working, but we know, and we've been working hard to get back to the full testing capacity, and the announcement today is a very positive one that we can do that from, all being well, from the 26th of July. The one point that we talk about the dual role examiners, to free up the dual role examiners to do the driving test, we've brought in 25 additional vehicle examiners to sort of backfill into the vehicle testing side. So I mean, we have been recruiting, and we're actually have another competition out for vehicle examiners as well as driving examiners. So it's going to be a busy summer period for us in terms of recruiting and bringing on both vehicle examiners and driving examiners.
The driving testing is much more difficult to resolve. I commend you for your effort to date, and that you've upped your potential, you're up your actual testing by some 35% in the month of May. That is good, but I remain concerned: is it enough, and is it sustainable? I'm assuming you will eventually get the stage where the holidays kicking in. You will have your employees wary of doing long hours of overtime. So what I would be interested to know is, with these additional dual skilled employees who will be transferring over, what your capacity will be on a monthly basis going forward at a sustainable level. What do you think you'll be able to maintain the rest of the year based on these numbers? Because there's a huge backlog.
I'd love to give you a direct answer, Roy. I mean, ultimately, over the summer months, we're going to have to look very, very carefully at the resources, both on the vehicle testing side and the driving testing side. As Pat has indicated, we are going through a cycle of recruitment for some temporary staff and also for permanent staff. We will be in a supply position, and that's where we aim to be for both vehicle examiners and driving examiners. As Pat indicated, I think there was something like 300 examiner applications for driving examiners. They'll go through the process. We'll probably bring around 100 of them in for interview. We're looking initially to fill 10 vacancies, but we'll have to keep that under close review, and we may then exceed that number depending on what the demand's like. So I think we're going to have to continue to monitor it very closely over the summer months, and as you say, holidays kick in. Our own staff will want time off naturally through that summer period, and we will try, and our commitment is to maximise our resource to deliver driving tests over the summer period, particularly when we have the dual role examiners temporarily promoted to the end of September, by which time we should have some of the full-time staff then recruited and trained and ready to start the work.
I think it's also worth pointing out, Roy, that as I said at the beginning, our full-time driving examiners are currently operating on a template of 6 driving tests per day. Now, when we move that up to up to 7, then we will automatically in 1 week increase our capacity by 107 driving tests. So small changes can make fairly significant differences. Yeah.
I'm looking at the size of the problem. 32,000 originally was the scale of the backlog. You've indicated that in recent months some 10,000 theory tests have been completed. an additional 8,000 will have been added to the list. So I'm assuming the total backlog is actually still getting worse because more people are doing their theory tests and subsequently will be looking for an appointment.
I think those are figures, and I say because we don't have the accurate pass rates for either the theory test or the driving test. 8,500 people didn't pass the theory test, so there will be only possibly based on the previous test pass history, and around 50% of those will have a valid theory test certificate to go forward for a driving test. But equally, the 5,500 driving tests that we conducted, not everybody passed the driving test, so those are figures, and we need to manage those to see, when do we get back to the sort of the equilibrium of theory tests coming into driving tests. And I think we'll have a lot more information as we get through the summer months to inform that position.
Looking at this historically and the figures that you have on your website, it would appear to me that historically you were delivering about 5,000 driver tests per month, roughly on average, historically prior to COVID. And if you were to maintain May at, which is 5,500, if that was your level that you were to maintain with a backlog of 32,000, that would take you 64 months. So we do need to ramp that up considerably. And the cost of doing a test is not inconsiderate, but it actually means that it's cost neutral to the department. You may even increase your income, because at £42.50 or £62.50 for weekend and evenings, I'm assuming this is at no cost to yourselves, because the applicant's paying for it. So back to the issue that I pushed, I think it was last October, of increasing even the number of temporary testers in order to deal with this backlog. Are you looking at bringing in even temporary? I realise there will not be sustainable full-time jobs, but at this moment in time, the thought of a perhaps 5-year wait before we get caught up is just not acceptable. So we do need a plan. You do need to have an estimate. I would have thought you must have some sort of calculation at what point you will become more up-to-date and current with that backlog.
Well, I certainly wouldn't envisage that we'll be in this position in 5 years' time. I certainly wouldn't like to think so.
Will be 1 year time? How many years?
Yeah, and I think once we get the information, that informs us about when the people are getting their theory tests and passing those, and how many tests we're conducting, what the pass rates are, I think we'll be in a much better position. I mean, instruction and driving tests for pretty much 10 months, of last year were didn't happen, and I know, and certainly Pat, through engagement with ADIs, instructors are obviously under pressure as well now to deliver the instruction that's required. So there's a number of different angles to this, Roy, and we will certainly keep very close scrutiny on it. The temporary staff that you talk about, we're promoting or we're using our own temporary staff, and that's what we're going through the training at the minute, to get more dual role staff to provide us with that flexibility. And indeed then we're looking at recruiting our full-time staff so that we can flex up our resource as and when required, and we are, as I say, our commitment throughout the summer is to deliver as many and conduct as many driving tests as we possibly can.
And then on another area, in terms of driving tests and thought of applying and having to wait 4 or 5 months, what's happened to need for new ambulance drivers or HGV drivers? I mean, we're hearing there's a shortage of drivers in the industry delivering key products for the economy and for the public. So are they also having to wait 4 and 5 months for a test?
No. The issue here is Category B driving tests. Your figures, just go back to them. The average is 4,600 before tests that we were doing per month, of which 3,900 were...
I was talking about overall tests, not just driver tests.
No, these are the figures. The average number of driving tests that we did per month was 4,600, of which 3,900 were Category B. So we were doing about 500, 600 other types of tests. So that would be motorbike tests, extended driving tests for people who were disqualified, taxi tests, lorry tests, HGV tests. We're continuing to do all of those as well. Indeed, off the figure of May, 5,500 tests were conducted, of which 4,661 were Category B. So we had the best part of 800 tests which were not a Category B test, and that's because we were offering HGV bus tests on a Sunday at the 3 locations where they're conducted. There is still a demand for them, but our priority is getting the balance right in this. So we're using our higher qualified driving examiners to provide those higher category tests to minimise the disruption to the service industry and the bus industry. But at the moment, whilst there may be a slight delay in terms of what it was pre-COVID, we're working with our stakeholders in those industries to minimise the impact so that they can prioritise their drivers. The handling of those tests is completely different to the Category B. It's handled directly with the test centre. So we're working directly with the stakeholder.
A final question to me then, in terms of PSVs for trailers. One of the issues that has been highlighted to me is Northern Ireland unusually does not have a means where drivers can double check that the trailer they're picking up is PSV'd, and there's a risk if they pick it up they become responsible for it and it can impact on their licence. That can be done online or by a phone call elsewhere. So this is causing a reluctance for some drivers to pick up Northern Ireland trailers. So my question is, when will there be a facility to check PSV whether of trailers, HGV trailers, whether it's online or by a phone call?
We're currently in the latter stages of introducing a new booking and rostering system, which will replace the existing system that we have had in place for 20 years. And one of the components of that is for people to actually look up the history and the details on their vehicle. Now, I'm not sure whether or not that facility is part of the first release, which is due to go live on the 20th of September, but I can certainly check that and get back to you. Again,
just for clarity, you can go online and check anybody's registration number. So my question is, when can someone who's having to check the status of somebody else's trailer can be checked, not just the owner of that trailer, but that someone who may be being asked to pick it up? Yeah, that's the point. But that system will now link into the DVLA system, so we will basically bolt on to the DVLA system, so whenever you put in that information you can check it up. So, but I'm not 100% sure whether or not that facility is in the first release. I would need to check that. Can you come back with an update as when that will be built? Thank you.
Right, can I just add, just to your previous question, we did work with the ambulance service very closely during lockdown to deliver a number of tests. The regulations allowed us to do tests for those that were ancillary to medical and frontline services, and I think we put a number of their drivers through during that period, working closely with the chief executive of the ambulance service at that time.
Okay, thank you.
We did 25 tests during lockdown for the ambulance service.
I'm aware, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Roy. And I suppose, as you can see from this first round of questions, there is a lot of interest in this particular topic. There's a lot of concern, so accountability will be key, and it's something that the committee will be keeping a close eye on, and we look forward to the figures that you're anticipating, and we will keep further review on that. In relation to where we're going now, members, we're going to now have focused questions in relation to the PSE report and the action plan. So I know you've already covered that in your initial briefing, so we'll just get straight into questions, and if members have any, please indicate in the usual way. So firstly, could I start off by indicating, could you respond to the following finding in the PSE report? In the committee's view, the DVA should have been much more rigorous in estimating a lift replacement schedule informed by the usage of the lifts across test centres.
Well, obviously, I was at the PAC hearing on the 15th of February, and we have been through the detail in terms of the evidence at that stage. Now, obviously, we have seen the report that has come from the Public Accounts Committee, and we are now moving to a stage where we will respond to that through a memorandum of reply. By the 8th of July, I think our reply from the Minister has to be signed off, and it has to be laid before the DOF on the 29th of July. We had taken a number of issues, and the big problem for us at the time of the lift was that it all happened at once. Obviously, the cracks were identified and manifested itself across the 52 lifts, and resulted in obviously what happened next was the service was badly disrupted at the end of January. We had plans in place for a lift replacement programme that had been agreed with the former Minister, Minister Hazard back in 2016, and then when the Assembly collapsed, then we hadn't got the funding approved at that point in time. But our plans were to roll out new equipment throughout all our test centres. I think the end date for that was 2022. And that would naturally have replaced the existing lifts that we had in place. When we sought further advice from the Central Procurement Directorate, or Construction Procurement Delivery, as I believe they're known now, we were advised to continue to maintain the lifts, make sure we had a proper preventative maintenance regime in place, that they were being properly inspected, and that's what we relied on. A condition report was carried out on those lifts in 2018 that said that the lifts were still workable, serviceable, and I say the planned preventative maintenance regime was in place. We relied on that. We sought assurance. There was independent assurance checks in place, and that's where we took our comfort on assurance that those lifts were fit and serviceable. And then obviously when the cracks appeared, and they appeared all across our lift stock, there was very little we could do. Health and safety was our primary concern, and they were suspended from use from that date on the 27th of January.
Okay. The PSC report refers to the over-reliance on the contractor with respect to the health of the lifts. What can the DVA do to address this particular matter? Well,
we put in place, following the Minister's review, the independent reviews both on the equipment failing and I suppose the governance around what we could do better, and we have the DVA action plan, which first, I think, published the first report published on the 31st of May, or published progress at the 31st of May last year. And there's a number of actions within that plan that we're taking forward to improve governance arrangements and our internal processes in managing the contracts, both from the contract management team, the health and safety operations team that are around that, and Mike, as the director for that business area, presides over it. And Chair, I was possibly going to suggest that it might be appropriate for Mike to come up to the table and replace Pat, because he is probably the lead official in this.
There is an ability for Mike to speak from his position with microphone, so if
you can move.
Right. So go ahead. If I add to what Jeremy was saying, the MAHA have been a strict maintenance contract, as would be standard practice. We also have then the independent inspections. I think one of the lessons that was learned, that because that inspector worked through the MAHA contract and reported to MAHA in the first place, that was thrown up in the audit report. So we have since gone out and ran a new competition, and now that independent inspector reports directly to DVA, which takes it out of the MAHA. But as well as Jeremy was saying, all aspects of the maintenance schedule were re-examined, were tightened up. Aspects of the contract were all re-examined as well and tightened up. And there's been a lessons learned report out of the two reports that were done at the time, the engineers report and the audit report. And as I say, we report on those now monthly, and they are published as well. So there's been a lot of measures put in place since.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to the Vice Chair, David Hilditch.
Thanks, Chair. And to be fair, there's probably about 4 members of this committee on the PAC. So I think it's unfair that we're now going to go through the whole thing again, to be honest. I think it's not. You have been before the Public Accounts Committee and answered the relevant questions. I suppose from our point of view, as probably authors of that report, is how we move forward. And I appreciate your input there and the explaining about the independent inspectors report coming straight to DVA now. And that's what it's all about, is trying to get confidence in the system again after what happened, moving forward, taking on board the recommendations and giving some guarantee of confidence to the public out there that things are moving forward. I appreciate the memorandum has to go back now to the PAC on the early July, is it, you think you said there?
Yeah, I think we have to send our response back on the 8th of July, and it has to be laid before the Department of Finance on the 29th.
Look forward to that, but what I would be looking for as a member of the PAC is that there's action, things are being taken seriously, and changes are in place to provide that confidence to the public, and the public purse as well, because it was obviously an expensive time.
Okay. Thank you, David. We'll go to Cahill, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Once again, like David, I'm on the PSA. We should register that in some way in terms of interest. Just 2 points I want to pick up on. Clearly, Chair, we were all in the chamber yesterday. We heard about the resurfacing issue in relation to some of the contract, and it's an issue that raises its head in terms of record keeping within the department, and it raises its head on the PSC as well. So, Jeremy, just in terms of the record keeping, you've ticked the box to say that has been acknowledged and that issue is going to be addressed. Would you like to comment in relation to how that's going to be done in the future? Where does that all go? Where does it sit? Where does it lie within the department in terms of whose responsibility is? Would you like to comment in relation to record keeping in relation to this matter?
Well, certainly record keeping is critically important across all of the agency and the department indeed. There is very detailed records kept in terms of the management of the contract, the engagement with the contractor. There's regular performance meetings and the management of KPIs through the contract. We have reorganised the directorate that Mike heads up in terms of making sure that we bring the health and safety team and they work then cohesively with the contract management team, and actually we've had internal audit in to review some of those revised processes that we put in and identified in the action plan for them to validate that what processes we put in ensure good governance across the business area. So I certainly as accounting officer seek comfort from the fact that the internal audit have already looked at 17 of the actions, the 23 actions in the business or the action plan, and have said, have confirmed that they're either complete, the majority of them are complete or substantially complete, and they're coming back to revisit that next week just to give a further endorsement of the couple of recommendations that they had identified that we have taken forward now. So, I mean, record keeping, it was highlighted in the initial assessment report, the audit report, into the lift issues that record keeping was an issue, and that was really at the time where things were happening very, very quickly. Obviously the lift issue happened on the 27th of January, and then the next number of weeks thereafter were very difficult and challenging, and while there was lots of meetings to try and deliver the operations and manage the vehicle testing capacity, at that point in time some of the record keeping was maybe not as good as it should have been. But suffice to say, Cathal, the records around the contract management and the record keeping across the department has certainly been in focus, and I am confident that we have and keep good accurate records of all our management of our contract meetings and all the feedback coming through the inspections and through the independent 6-month thorough examinations. The record keeping is for it. I don't know if Mike wants to add anything to that.
Not a lot to add. I think Jeremy touched on the point. We have a lot of routine meetings scheduled, the monthly service management meetings and everything, and they all have always been very routinely recorded and filed away. As Jeremy said, I think what caused us the issue then, because an awful lot happened and a lot of these meetings were created at very short notice and very informal in that sort of nature, then while there was emails floating about noting the actions, they weren't recorded as they should have been. And I say lessons have been learned. And I'm glad to see that we've sort of applied those, because we're back into the same situation with COVID, where we're having to react very quickly. So I say we're an awful lot more conscious now, all the staff, that we, regardless how informal a meeting is, that we need to keep a record of it. And as Jeremy said, the audit will be in again next week to check on where we are with the actions before we do the next monthly report.
No, I appreciate it, and thanks very much for the answers. I mean, clearly, those who are listening to the debate yesterday, I mean, there was an issue too in other contracts in respect of the road contracts. So I asked them that, and I know on the PSA we had this session, so I appreciate that. Just one other question I'd like to ask from me in terms of one of the recommendations. The Commission review into the arrangements for DVA and assesses effectiveness, including customer service. Jeremy, would you like to comment in respect of that recommendation arising from the report?
Well, I suppose, Cathal, it's really a recommendation. Certainly recommendation 1 and 2 are very clearly for DVA, and we'll certainly respond to that in due course. Recommendation 3 is really more so for the department and I know Katrina will be taking that recommendation forward, but no doubt she will consult with us in terms of the review on the basis of the trading fund status that's been in place since 2016, and I think it's important that we always review the effectiveness of how we deliver our services. So certainly I will engage with the Permanent Secretary and the senior leadership team on that, in that regard.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for the answers.
Okay, thank you, Cathal. Martina?
And can I ask, in terms of one of the recommendations in the report, is that the DVA needs to renew and strengthen its focus on customer service. Now, the PAC noted that this wasn't the first time that the DVA had found itself at the forefront of negative media. And as the report made reference to a significant waiting times for driving tests, and we talked about that earlier in 2019, long before COVID. So how do you intend to take this recommendation forward?
I would say that the agency has prided itself on its customer service, and we deal with millions of customers through 1 million tests a year, and 100,000 other tests. So we obviously touch a lot of people across the country, and generally speaking, our customer service record has been very, very good. The one thing that I would say, you referenced some of the waiting time issues. That was not with driving tests, but with vehicle tests back in 2019.
But are you saying that despite what the report has said,
yes,
that the PAC report said, that you're saying that wasn't the case?
And the capacity back in issues around vehicle testing, in terms of the waiting times, that is something that unfortunately we will have to manage. And as Pat's already said, we've effectively moved now to 7 days testing with the introduction of Sunday testing to try and meet the increasing demand for vehicle testing services. Members will know that we're building a new test centre at Hydebank, and construction is well underway with that to be open next year, and we're hoping that will alleviate a lot of those pressures, and enabling customers to get their vehicle test appointment within time when the reminder's issued. So there's lots of things that we're taking forward to improve customer service, and we'll certainly reflect that in the response to the PAC and our memorandum of reply. Obviously, COVID has had a major impact on our services, and the impact on our customer services team in particular, and on our operations team and those in the front line. We've never experienced the like of it before. It has been extremely challenging. No doubt there will be lessons learned from the process when hopefully we move into more normal times.
Well, the PAC report wasn't just about what happened during COVID. Obviously, everyone understands that COVID has had a massive impact on you and has caused the pressures that it has. But the waiting times for driving tests that the PAC was referring to was in 2019, long before COVID. I think some of the PAC members may be listening, and others that are in the room, might find, I was a little bit surprised when I heard you say about, applauding your customer service, given that the PAC has criticised you for it. So you probably be as well taking that criticism on the chin and showing the PAC what you're doing about it.
Yeah, the waiting time issue was to do with vehicle tests in 2019, and that's to do with the capacity. There hasn't been an issue with driving tests, to the best of my knowledge, but certainly anything we can do to improve customer service, and yes, we will take the recommendation from the PAC, and we will take it seriously, and we will respond in our memorandum of reply, with the proposals and what we intend to do to improve customer service across the agency.
I'm glad to hear you say that. Can I also ask you in relation to an item that was raised in the report where the DVA stated it wasn't possible to determine the absolute life cycle of each vehicle lift, as it's determined by a number of factors, and you just talked about load distribution, load itself, and a number of lift cycles. But upon reflection, I'm just asking you, how do you feel about that statement? Because surely the specification of each vehicle lift that was being purchased, and surely they give such a determination so that it should have been possible to at least give an estimation of life expectancy.
We met with MAHA, and their own managing director identified that their lifts could potentially last anywhere between 5 and 25 years, and it depended on a number of factors, and obviously usage and the load that they were carrying were all factors in that. Going forward, and obviously we want to ensure that this never happens again. MAHA have confirmed that they will stand over the lift based on the usage and DVA environment for at least 4 years. And we now need to look at how we refine that model. We have fitted the lifts with vehicle counters to try and give us a more accurate assessment of their usage and the loads that they're carrying to help us inform more accurately our replacement programme. But we have also a new equipment provider that we're working with at the minute to performance test their new equipment, which will be rolled out. The first centre it'll be rolled out to will be in Hydebank, and then it'll be rolled out to other centres thereafter. So we will also need to have the same discussions and work with them to ensure that we get an accurate assessment and inform our future lift replacement programmes. But inevitably we're going to replace lifts more frequently than we had done previously, and that clearly is one of the lessons learned from this lift episode.
Could I just add to that then? Yeah, as Jeremy was saying, what was explained to us really, what the manufacturer had done was, put the maximum weight on a lift and fully extend that lift, and that's when it came up with the certain cycles, like 22,000. Ours typically probably would be only a quarter of the weight of the maximum weight on the lifts, and again, you're not always fully extending the lift. So once you had those random factors, and then the managing director from AHA said it was very difficult to quantify it. But what we're doing is we're working with them at the moment. As Jeremy says, we have fitted cycle counters. We're working with them, given the average weight of our vehicles and all their metrics around our own, can we come up with a counter that would be accurate for DVA. And the other comforting thing really to let the committee know is we will be replacing those lifts now as part of this new contract. So the current lifts that have just been purchased will be all replaced within that 4 or 5 years where MAHA guarantee it. And then we bring in the new lifts, and then we'll apply all our lessons learnt then to the new lifts. And if I could just go back to your previous question on the communications too. We're in the middle of a large transformation programme we have been, and we're creating more online services for the customer. Pat mentioned earlier then a new booking system that will go live in September. One of the lessons learned is we want to contact our customers with the old booking system. In some cases we have a mobile number and we can do very quick texts or got an email address. Other times it's just postal addresses. So really going forward as part of the strategy, we want to be able to communicate with people very quickly. So we will be pushing to see if we can get mobile numbers, email addresses, so that we can be very interactive with the customers.
Okay, much reassuring. Finally, can I say that, look, this debacle has cost millions of pounds, and it stopped people from getting an MOT, and some of those people, as you know, drove for a living. But not only that, the lack of safety inspections put staff at risk. So it's absolutely vital that the proper safety procedures are in place and stay in place. And are you satisfied that lessons have been learned and that your staff will be protected now going forward?
Yes, I'm satisfied that lessons have been learned from this, and as Mike says, there is a lessons learned report from the action plan and all the steps that we've taken. The reason why we suspended the use of the lifts was for the very reason of protecting the health and safety of our staff and our customers. That was certainly not something that we would have contemplated continuing when the cracks were identified. But thankfully the new lifts are in place, the new inspection regimes in place. Our action plan is substantially complete, and I am hoping that this can sort of close that chapter, and going forward that this will not happen again.
I want to acknowledge the work done by the PAC and the members of this committee who are also on the PAC, and I appreciate what we've heard today, that lessons have been learned, and it's something that the committee, I'm sure, will monitor now going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Liz now for a question.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for answers so far. Just, I suppose, leading on from what Martina said there in terms of the new lifts and the responses in relation to that. I know during the investigation it said the lifts had undertaken approximately 150 to 160,000 cycles since they'd been installed. despite it said that there was 22,000 cycles is what they were designed for. So is it, you know, I would say now that the new lifts will be capped at the 22,000 cycle lifts?
It's, I suppose, back to the point that Mike raised. The 22,000 lift cycles was based on the lifts carrying the full load, which in most cases in our test centres are probably only carrying about a quarter of that load. So it's important for us to put in the metrics to accurately assess the life expectancy for the lifts in the DVA environment specifically. The one thing, say we have comfort that MAHA have guaranteed the life expectancy of the lifts for the next 4 years, and any refinement on that through the metrics as we put in place in terms of the counters and the load capacity on those will help inform the replacement programme. So, you know, certainly those first lifts were installed, I think they started to be installed about March of last year, so, you know, they have, you know, significant life expectancy remaining, notwithstanding the ongoing planned preventative maintenance regime will continue, as will the thorough examinations by the independent insurance company.
Yeah, I suppose, so do you think then, Jeremy, it would mean that looking back at the volume of cycles in the previous lifts, that it would probably be reduced though going forward?
Yes, I would anticipate that we will end up replacing lifts more frequently than certainly the last number of lifts. I wouldn't want to speculate on a timescale for that, but I certainly think there'll be a more frequent equipment replacement as a result of this.
Okay, and I mean, apart from purchasing of new equipment, and obviously that will have an additional cost if they are being replaced more quickly, have any of the new safety mechanisms that are in place now following this have any additional costs for DVA?
I don't believe that there is significant additional costs with the mechanisms that we put in place. Most of those are improved management arrangements. I say we have taken the independent insurance inspections and we have contracted it out directly to ourselves as opposed to through MAHA. But I'm certainly not aware of any additional costs through the safety controls that we put in place.
No, costs will be minimal.
Okay, I know that's good, and I mean, I suppose it is just reviewing and improving what's in place. My last question is just when looking at the outstanding action plan for the lifts, one of the remaining actions related to agreeing the design and spec for new lifts with the supplier and conducting performance testing, which was scheduled to be completed by I think May 22. Just could you elaborate a wee bit more on that process and a wee bit of a detail around why it's anticipated for May next year?
Well, I'll start and then I'll hand over to Pat, who's the senior responsible owner for the equipment project, so we will have a lot of detail. We have set up a pilot test lane on Corporation Street in Belfast, and the new equipment has arrived from various parts of the country. I think it eventually landed with us in March following some delays due to COVID restrictions, but the whole purpose of having such a rigorous testing regime is to make sure that the equipment, both the hardware and the software, stands up to the rigours of the testing environment in DVA, and that testing has begun. The lifts arrive, there's brake rollers, there's you know, the test lanes there and is operational. I'll hand over to Pat, who can maybe provide you a wee bit more detail about the process and the rigour that's been applied.
Yeah, the equipment project for the new test centres and the rollout of the replacement of the equipment in the remaining test centres was tendered a couple of years ago. And in that there was a specification for the lift, but we were heavily involved with the manufacturer, and we actually went to their manufacturing plant in Burgos in Spain, a company called Eevee, and worked with them on the prototype of the lift and the design specifications. And we worked with their parent company, Worldwide Environmental Products from San Diego, California, on the certification of that lift. So we finally got the lift delivered late last year. Again, as a result of COVID, things were delayed. We have it in our Corporation Street offices, and we're putting it through rigorous testing. In fact, we put it through full load testing in the latter part of last week, putting it up for 100 cycles a day within 3 hours. To determine whether or not there was any pressure on the hydraulics or on the mechanical parts. There wasn't, and that was reassuring. And over the next number of weeks, we're essentially going to attempt to test that lift to destruction. just to see whether or not it will meet the demands that we're going to put upon it in a test centre. One of the important learning points from this is where there are opportunities to improve the specification, or we detect within the lift that something could be improved. The manufacturer is very keen to work with us and to build that into the design specification for the lifts that will be rolled out to the Hyde Bank Test Centre next year. And in 8 months' time, we'll be placing the order for all of that equipment. But by that time, we'll have tested the lift, we'll have tested the brake rollers, we'll have tested the play detectors, we'll have tested the emissions analyzer, we'll have tested the headlight tester, we'll have created a virtual test centre in Corporation Street where we can move vehicles between lanes so that we can replicate, as far as is reasonably practical, a test centre in one location using a variety of vehicles over a period of time. Then when we get it into Hyde Bank, we'll do the final in-place testing where it's rather than it being a virtual lane, it will be the actual lane, so we'll test it once it's all in place in the new test centre. But by that stage, we will have tested the mechanics of all of the equipment to make sure that they perform to the specification that we set, and that the calibration that's those pieces of equipment have been calibrated to, that the readings that we get for them are consistent over a period of time using different types of vehicles.
Thanks very much to both of you. That was really good, and I think it's very reassuring to hear, just how rigorous the testing is, and hopefully, and I'm sure you'd feel the same, that we're never in a situation like this again. It's been a very challenging year for everyone, and I think when we look back even to when this all kicked off at the start of last year, and obviously COVID has had a massive impact as well. So thanks very much for all your feedback on that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We have 3 remaining members asking questions, and we are a bit pushed for time, so I'd ask members to keep them focused. So firstly, Keith, then Dolores, then Roy.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, gentlemen. My question is sort of regarding cycles. I've done a quick calculation that you're probably doing 7,500 cycles per year if you base on 3 an hour, 8 hours a day approximately, for lifts. So is there a chance, considering your last lift's done 150 to 160,000, you go back to a 4-year change, which is costing 1.98 million, and I'm not taking away from safety at all, that it's overkill?
I don't know that I agree with your figures. I think the figures that were estimated was about 20,000 lift cycles per lift, 22,000 in the DVA test centre environment. So I say 4 years is I suppose the minimum figure that they stand over the equipment, and then obviously then we would have to factor that in, taking into consideration the other metrics and safety, as you say, to get a real sort of qualified life expectancy for the lift that we can work with in terms of our replacement programme. So that, I suppose, is where we're looking to get all the other information, the metrics that was previously unavailable, to help inform those decisions going forward in terms of replacement programme.
Just to clarify the figure point, if they're doing roughly 7,500 per year, some of them was in a long 10 years?
Some of those lifts, I think, were in 10 years, yeah.
That's 75,000. On this paper here it says 150 to 200,000, but anyway, we'll not get into the point of that. But it's just, my point is we don't come down too low and replace them. Perfectly good equipment. That's all I'm making. I'm not taking away from the safety aspect, but we don't go too far the other way. The pendulum shouldn't swing too far back. And final question, Mike covered it briefly. Just from a maintenance point of view, obviously I presume MAHA's got the contract of maintenance and inspection, yeah? Mm-hmm. Is there an additional inspector plus the insurance inspection? So is there 3 aspects to that? Because normally when I equip lifting equipment, you have a loader lift, you have the insurance inspection. But have you then a separate inspector, including the MAHA inspection? That's right, yep. I mean, and that's one of the lessons we did learn from this report, and one of the recommendations that came out of the audit report was that we should manage the independent insurance inspection, and that contract was put in place on the 1st of May last year, so they report directly to DVA now, as opposed to through the MAHA contract. MAHA still have the planned preventative maintenance arrangements in place, and they do their routine inspections of the equipment and maintain it and repair it as required. So it's MAHA inspecting plus the insurance inspector reporting back to DVA? Reporting back to DVA, yep. That's clear. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you, Keith. Over to Dolores.
Thanks, Chair. I want to you to your new role. I look forward to working with you, particularly given that you're a constituency colleague. Could I just ask, one of the things that happened during the time of the lift crisis was about getting good information out to customers and about the telephone and electronic system. People find it hard to get through. I just wonder, were there any lessons learned in relation to sort of frequently asked questions, and whether the people at the end of the line were properly trained and briefed in terms of being able to answer the questions raised by customers?
Yeah, I think at the time, Dolores, there was certainly, it was quite frantic. Certainly in the first 3 to 4 weeks, as you'd appreciate, as we tried to maximise the number of tests and get in touch with those customers affected. I think, if anything, we have learned through the sort of the prolonged COVID crisis the importance of being able to contact our customers directly, and Mike touched on it earlier. We've seen a big uptake in our online services and our digital transformation. We hope to be able to access those customers by way of email and text, as opposed to the old previous, send out letters, which I have to say has been a bit of an inhibitor in being able to contact those customers directly when we've been putting in place resumption of driving tests, for example, where we had to write out the number of customers when others we could have texted or emailed. So we're encouraging those other digital channels to come forward so that we can be more responsive and communicate much more quickly to the affected groups. So definitely a lesson learned, and something that we will work to take forward through our wider transformation of all our systems.
I think if I could add to that, Dolores, our booking system now makes it mandatory that a mobile number or an email address is provided to us at the point of booking. So that then gives us the opportunity to contact people electronically very quickly.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for that. The only further comments I would add is, how did you ensure that quality is maintained? Will you initiate like a mystery shopper type to dip sample the quality of interaction? And also then, will you or have you worked with the police and others in relation to designing out fraud in relation to those communication methods?
I think on the survey, we have surveys on the booking service, because there's over 1 million bookings as a year. Now, I must admit, we had to suspend some of those during the crisis. To give you an idea, I think at one stage the number of queries coming in through our customer service team had gone up 3,000%. So again, it was sort of batten down the hatches and try to get that information out as quickly as we could. But we would normally have surveys for people after we've communicated with them, and I say the idea is to reinstate that. I think the big issue at the moment, the means of communication is one thing, but due to the many measures we've put in place, sometimes it's very difficult. You're trying to communicate a complex message. And even when we're going out with those text messages, some of those we're going over the equivalent of something like 16 texts, because there's a limit to what characters you can put in. So I think part of the issue has been really the complexity of what we're trying to communicate, as well as just the channels.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Dolores. Go to Roy for the final question.
Just a brief point. There's a bit like Keith in terms of the specification of the lists. You've indicated that you're operating at about a quarter of the weight that the design cycle has operated, with a very smaller number of successful outcomes, shall we say. Now, by reducing that weight by a quarter will have a dramatic effect in increasing the number of valid cycles that it will be able to operate, considerably reduces the stresses on the components and the likelihood of the development of stress fractures. So my question is, in specifying new equipment, can you not more closely specify a guarantee? Asked what is the guarantee period based on your likely user model, so you have a better idea of ultimately the running costs of using that particular manufacturer's equipment? Can you not get the manufacturer to tell you more accurately how long they will last for, and he will stand over them?
I think it's certainly a lesson learned going forward. The one thing I would say is that the contract for the new equipment supplier was awarded before the lift issues occurred, so we didn't have the benefit of hindsight in terms of the award of that contract, unfortunately. But certainly, I agree that we should be able to use information that's available, such as the load capacity and the number of cycles, to try and inform a more reasonable. It's back to the point, Keith. As raised, you do not want to get rid of very serviceable equipment before its end of life, so that we have to try and find a balance, and hopefully the information that we get through the work that we're doing now will help us inform that for these lifts and any future lifts that we install.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Quick supplementary, Keith.
What you see on the new lifts is the vibrators, they call it, are they on the new lifts?
Yes.
It's obviously cut more strain than a vertical lift, it's a horizontal load.
Well, the new lift has been designed with the plate detectors as part of the design specification, and in terms of the new lift was certified at it operating at its maximum capacity. The maximum capacity of the lift is about 4 tonnes. It was actually certified at 5 tonnes, so well above the weight that we would ever operate it at, although there will be a mechanism put on it so that you cannot exceed the maximum. So the lift is actually over-specified, and that's something that we're content with. But it is done in association with the LOLA regulations, which would state that a certification will go with 22,000 cycles per year. And as both Meg and Jeremy have said, when we were speaking to MAHA, they would guarantee that a lift would last anywhere from 5 to 25 years, depending on how you use it, how you maintain it, where you use it, how it's stored, etc., etc. It's a very, very difficult figure to arrive at.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And this brings this session to close. I know, David, you did mention at the start something in relation to taxi operators.
Yes.
We have time for a question if you
Yeah, I'll not test your patience. I know you need out of here, but it was an issue that I did want to introduce today on the back of the committee agreeing last week. And there's been some meetings revolving around some MLA colleagues and indeed MPs about this matter of taxi enforcement. And we've spoken to quite a few taxi drivers who there's dissatisfaction there in relation to how it's carried out. I know they do operate under legislation, but is there like a public code of conduct as to how, when an operation is taking place, that the public can identify whether things are being done correctly or not, or there's maybe things not being done correctly?
Well, yes, I mean, our enforcement officers are all civil servants.
Sorry, you were previously in charge of that unit, Jeremy, is
yes,
that right?
I was head of enforcement, yeah. So I'm well placed to answer. Yeah, there is the NICS Code of Ethics where we're all civil servants and enforcement officers fall under that. We have our own internal DVA Code of Conduct policy and conflict of interest policy, and again, that sort of sets the standard of contact for all our staff in the agency. But moreover, then enforcement officers have to comply with a number of other sort of legal statutes, including the Criminal Procedure and Investigations Act, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. And the PACE codes of practice. So the reality is, when they're out there, they're trained investigators. We're in enforcement, we're dealing with issues, in terms of roadworthiness, licensing infringements, that type of thing. So generally, the engagement can sometimes be, challenging and often confrontational. The key thing, though, is that the evidence that the enforcement officers gather then supports the outcome, be that dealing with an offence through a defects notice or a prohibition notice or a fixed penalty, or in some cases, in more serious offences, going to court. Obviously, then we have to prepare the case file for going to court. We have to prepare the evidential test for the PPS to direct on and determine whether those cases then proceed to court. So there is protection within the system for anybody that encounters enforcement officers, and our own internal complaints procedure, of course, if they feel that they have been dealt with unfairly at the roadside. So all of those things are in place to support proper enforcement at the roadside.
Okay. From an appearance and an identification point of view, while those duties are being carried out, would it be fair to say that officers would have some sort of, say, high-vis or indeed identification badges? Or is it a case of, is it undercover work? Is there a degree of entrapment involved in the situation?
Entrapment has been an allegation that's been raised before, but I think some of the members referred to mystery shopper. Ultimately, we get complaints about illegal taxis operating, for example, and we have to prove and supply the evidence, get the evidence to support any claims of that. So there will be occasions when officers will operate without high-vis or their identifiers at that point of time, but at the point of detection they will clearly identify who they are, what their purpose is. We are trying to improve road safety through the measures that we take at the roadside, and also trying to protect and ensure that there's fair competition in the taxi industry, the bus industry and the goods industry. So, there is a mixture, a lot of it done high-vis. We have a lot of liveried vehicles that are out there, and hopefully that acts as a deterrent, but there is also an element of covert work that is done in an investigation of complaints.
That includes potentially people saying they need to go to hospital, they're maybe acting drunk, various things like that, and try and stop the driver, because don't forget Belfast is full of taxi drivers who are of a good nature, they're fair.
They would not act in a way that any other member of the public would act.
Good.
They wouldn't, the bottom line is there's strict licensing laws in around operating of taxis depending on what class you're in, and any licensed operator knows the class that they're in and what they're permitted to do within that licence. So they should not be illegally picking up staff or customers who might be an enforcement officer, and that is one way that we will check that they are complying with the regulations.
Okay, Chair, I know you're caught for time. I hope to return to this maybe after recess, when things will make. There's others wanting to feed into it. So if the committee would bear with us and actually have a look at this, it's a very interesting subject. It's something that
I think it's an issue that merits its own discussion in relation to the seriousness of it. So I'm more than happy to take that point on board, given that this session has run over in relation to the topics. So with that vein in mind, I'll go to Cahill because he does have his hand up, but if you bear in mind that the committee will probably come back to this.
Just quickly, and I really appreciate coming in. And Jeremy, you know this here, I'd asked the department a number of weeks ago in relation to was there any consideration at looking the operational hours within Belfast City. We know that the hours are extended from 12 midnight through to 6 o'clock in the morning. If Jerry can come back in writing to state whether or not that would extend to 24 hours, the whole of Saturday or whatever. I had written that question a number of weeks ago. I need clarification on that, whether there's any indication from the department to look at those operational hours, especially at the weekend.
Okay, well, we'll leave that with Jeremy to come back.
It would be a matter for the department in terms of the legislation, the policy taken forward. From what I can gather, Cahill, what you're suggesting would require a legislative change that would have to be endorsed by the Minister.
Okay.
Yeah, fair enough, and I've just got that back in writing, please. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, with that in regard, could I thank Jeremy, Pat and Mike for coming to the committee this morning and taking our questions. Much appreciated. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, committee, that was a very good session, I felt. Is there any follow-up points particularly that members, obviously the great deal of interest in the driving test, something that we're going to have to continually keep a watching brief on, I believe, regarding what the targets are and are they being met. I do think we need to look at something in form of benchmarking as to how we go forward. I think some of us may get lost in the statistics of this thing, but I think as Keith rightly outlined, we may be improving in relation to the number of tests that are being carried out, but in relation to the backlog, we're only chasing our tail when it comes to that in that regard. So I think if we could agree a point, I would so propose that we look at how we can set a benchmark and keep a watching brief on the particular issue of driving tests going forward, given the backlog that there is. Would members be agreed with that point? Agreed? Okay.
Chair,
sorry,
can I come in on a point as well on that? In relation to the theory test I'd raised there about, young people particularly who are waiting to book again who failed their theory test, and Pat had said about the Ballymena Centre, which is actually, I was speaking to, I had let the constituent know there, and they've said they've been having problems even getting booked in there. So just as well as the driving test, I think to keep on about theory tests as well, because it's causing huge problems too.
I would agree with that, Liz, and I think probably your point in relation to somebody that fails a theory test and then being put out of the system and having to reapply, again, like the failing of a driving test, I think it's a very unfair system. So it's something that I would want to continue to put pressure on the department to see if there is alternatives by way in which we can provide for those going forward, because I think it is an important issue. And I also am getting a lot of emails in relation to people that can't get onto the system. They're going on for a booking slot and can't get it, despite what some of the the evidence that we heard today. So I think that's something that we need to keep an eye on. So our members agreed with those points?
Agreed.
Great. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, moving on to item 15, forward work programme. Can I draw members' attention to the proposed draft work programme, our forward work programme for next week's meeting at page 254, draft forward work programme. Members content? Content. Okay, item 16. Sorry, Liz, go ahead.
It was just in relation to the forward work programme. I know we're very close to recess, and one of the items we've been discussing in the previous weeks was a request from Eevee and Lisburn Chamber to brief the committee in relation to central parking zones in both those areas. So I am very conscious that we're heading into recess. Is there any possibility we could get a slot, whether it's on a different day at the committee, as we've done with some of the other sectors, to have that briefing before recess, because it is a very, very important issue.
Okay, Liz, I suppose probably I will hand it over to the clerk on that point as to where we can slot that in, but are you happy with an informal meeting as opposed to a formal committee meeting on that issue?
Well, I mean, I think if it means that we can get it in before recess, I think they would, it is important that we get it in where we can. The committee need to hear what the issues are, and hopefully we can get some work done on that.
Okay.
I just think that September could be too far off, and then you're actually then, you're further back on where you're going with it.
I'm just hearing that actually is going to be slotted in on the 30th of June, so that should allay that concern.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. No other issues on the forward work programme, members? No? Okay. Can I now go to item 16, any other business? Have members any other items of business that they wish to raise? No? Okay, that leaves 17, date, time and location of next meeting. The next meeting will take place at 10 a.m. Wednesday the 23rd of June 2021 in the Senate Chamber Parliament buildings. Okay, and with that I'm happy to adjourn. Thank you, members.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme signed.